It all begins with a flashback to the past of the MC, and he was in the middle of a fierce clash against the hero. And right before taking down the MC, he explains that he was only doing all that to ensure a future for the children. After remembering how he had been taken down, our boy wakes up with a start. He sits up, catching his breath, after remembering all of that. His name was Archimond, the infamous sorcerer also known as the Fiend of the Continent. He remembers that in the past, he lost his cool and almost destroyed the continent, but ended up falling to the sword of the Knight of the North, Berkel Rhineland. However, when he opened his eyes again, he realized he had been reborn 200 years into the future as a descendant of that very same man. The worst part is that he came back with all the memories of his past life, and he still complains about not being able to get used to his current hair. Talk about bad luck for the MC. He can't even get his revenge like this. At that moment, someone says he was talking way too loud in his sleep and calls him Young Master Klein. The one saying this is Father Garrison, a wild man who has been testing the boy for years because he truly believes he is Archimond Klein, tries to brush it off by saying he is just tired, but is soon caught off guard by his maid, Aaron, who bursts in shouting frantically. The red-haired girl yells that she heard everything he said while he was asleep. She starts mocking his lines about destroying the continent, leaving the MC desperate, trying to make her zip her lip. This annoying gossip is totally ruining things for our boy Berkman. The butler knocks on the door to give a heads up about the swordplay demonstration, while Garrison thanks the maid for the info. With an intimidating look, the priest warns that young Master Klein will need to go through double the usual cleansing sessions. Desperate about the penalty waiting for him, the MC quickly covers the maid's mouth so she won't say another word. From outside the estate, you can hear the boy shouting in frustration against that wild priest. Later on, Klein walks through the hallways trying to figure out what this swordplay demonstration is all about. Berkman explains that is exactly what it is, and mentions that this time the Duke himself ordered the young master to attend the event as well. Klein is surprised that his father wants him there, while Aaron approaches all happy, bringing a little snack. The butler scolds the girl for making rude requests to the boss, but the MC asks him not to be so strict, and as he hands her the treat, Klein mentions that she was incredibly thrilled with the snack. The MC found out how to keep her quiet, just give her food. The boy finds it strange that his father is calling him for this for the very first time, but the butler begins to reveal the real motive behind the gathering. Berkman explains that the relatives from the Branch family decided to pay a visit to the place. Klein becomes thoughtful upon hearing about the arrival of these distant relatives. As soon as they enter the hall, a group of arrogant people spots the MC and starts making fun of him. They start laughing out loud and sarcastically call him Big Brother Archimond instead of using his real name. The cousins tease Klein, asking if he has stories from the 7 years he spent isolated in a monastery, laughing at the situation. He ignores the remarks and notices other relatives from the northern branch stuffing their faces. The author really roasted these cousins. They are all unpleasant and out of shape. The MC also spots a mysterious blonde girl sitting on a couch who looks like she belongs to the Western lineage. She observes everything with a cold, superior gaze, showing zero interest in anyone around her. She barely showed up, and I'm already hooked. While Klein walks straight past them, the mocking cousins assume he simply can't hear them. One of them keeps the insults coming, calling the MC a total joke and questioning his presence in the Rhineland family. They get annoyed when Klein keeps ignoring them and demand that he answer, but the boy doesn't care at all about what they say. Klein confesses that he doesn't even remember their names and knows that all this boldness only happens because the main family is slipping. The fact that they openly ignore a direct heir proves this weakness, but everyone's attention soon shifts to a sword match. In the center of the hall, two young men are training intensely, and one of them ends up being pushed back hard during the exchange of blows. Annoyed at being outperformed, the purple-haired boy charges furiously, shouting Deline's name. However, his strike is easily avoided with a quick and precise move from his opponent. The purple-haired youth gets even angrier and demands that his opponent stop holding back and fight for real. The opponent masterfully dodges all the strikes and warns Dalton that the matchup is already decided, but he refuses to accept it. The blonde youth just smiles calmly upon hearing that, being considered by everyone as the great hope of that family. His name is Deline Rhineland, Klein's half-brother, known for being an absolute prodigy with the sword. Klein recognizes that it is only because of Deline's immense talent that the reputation of the House of Swordsmen still stands strong. Dalton doesn't give up and charges in for one more attempt, making sure that the result will be different this time. While watching the first sword match of this new life, Klein's eyes begin to glow intensely with a purple hue. The opponent's attack rushes at high speed toward the prodigy, who remains completely unfazed by the threat. With extreme agility, the blonde youth moves swiftly across the arena, leaving his opponent surprised by such speed. With his eyes glowing and focused on every single move, the MC realizes he can perfectly see the entire path of the strike. The MC carefully analyzes his brother's footwork during the match. He also notices the exact timing Delin uses to get leverage and spring off the ground. Meanwhile, Dalton gets completely frustrated and loses his temper mentally. At his opponent, Klein can even see the flow of energy and realizes it is the secret art of the Rhineland family. Delin executes the legendary meteor sword technique and lands a direct, spectacular hit on Dalton. The practice match ends right then and there, leaving Dalton down and completely frozen. Delin calmly points out that he had already warned him that he would be the only one losing out in that duel. The relatives are highly impressed to see the meteor sword technique used so successfully right in front of everyone. They comment that this serves as a warning that the main family is still strong, while Klein rubs his eyes after seeing a strange gleam. Suddenly, someone calls out the MC's name loudly in the middle of the hall. Delin approaches happily and asks when he got there, but Klein replies that he just arrived, hearing that he should have given a heads up earlier. The older brother smiles and says he would have tried even harder if he knew Klein was watching the practice. The MC thinks about how his brother seems perfect at everything, but quickly changes the subject and asks why the distant relatives came back. He wonders if they only came to squeeze out more money, when suddenly Heinkel praises Delin's excellent work. Heinkel, the seventh leader of the Rhineland family, commends his son for already perfectly mastering the house's secret technique. The prodigy runs over to greet Heinkel. The current head of the family that the MC just reincarnated into Heinkel says his son must have worked really hard all this time to achieve that result. Klein realizes that, to his father, Delin represents the very last bit of pride left for that fading family. Another knight also praises the young prodigy, saying that his energy control and precision are simply overwhelming talents. Delin gets humble from the compliments and says he still needs to improve a lot. When Heinkel calls his name in a serious tone, the leader recalls the final words of Duke Berkel Rhineland, saying that a knight from their family must always be the greatest in the entire empire. Heinkel asks him to keep this teaching close to his heart and keep moving forward, receiving a respectful thank you from Delin. At that moment, the father turns toward the MC and calls him by name. Klein gets tense and anxious about his father's sudden approach. Heinkel slowly moves his hand toward the MC's head. Upon touching the boy, the man coldly says he can't feel any energy flow coming from him. Klein just apologizes and reflects that, with zero expectations placed on him, he is now nothing more than a useless weight on the family. The black-haired knight tries to stick up for the boy, explaining that he spent his most important years confined in a monastery around them. The relatives start gossiping maliciously about Rhineland's second son having no energy at all. Heinkel tries to comfort Klein by saying there are other paths besides the sword, while the cousins whisper that the main bloodline is a lost cause. As he walks away, the boy thinks to himself that he doesn't care about the insults, but remembers the hero Berkel with absolute annoyance. He recalls Berkel's words about fighting solely to protect the future of the children of the continent. Klein gets extremely furious, realizing that Berkel risked his own life in the past to save ungrateful people just like them. To make things worse, one of the arrogant relatives shouts from afar, waving goodbye in a mocking tone out of nowhere. Dalton steps into his path and starts mocking Klein for being a Rhineland member who doesn't even know how to hold a sword. He smiles provokingly and says, "The MC is a total embarrassment for trying to act like he belongs to royalty." Klein remembers that Dalton is also from a branch family and fires back at the provocation, asking if chasing girls around the hall is something to be proud of. Dalton panics upon seeing his secret exposed, while the MC mocks him for thinking money would stop rumors from spreading. The young man tries to yell, demanding to know where he heard that lie, but Klein simply stomps hard on his foot. With that, the purple-haired boy loses his balance and face plants on the ground in a humiliating way. The MC keeps walking and points out that Dalton is just taking out his anger from getting beaten by Delin, leaving the young man furious. Dalton yells back in hatred, saying he is just a nobody who doesn't even know his own mother, which makes Klein freeze in his tracks. The MC turns around with an extremely terrifying look and coldly asks what he just said. Dalton is paralyzed with fear upon facing that intimidating and rage-filled expression from Klein. Klein reflects that his anger isn't over the mother he never knew, but rather the obvious disrespect these relatives have for the direct bloodline. The MC wonders in outrage how that family could fall so low as to tolerate such boldness from distant relatives. He can't accept that the bloodline of the great hero who defeated him in the past has turned into something so pathetic at that moment. The black-haired knight steps into the argument and sternly orders Dalton to cut that out immediately. He stares at the young man seriously and warns that he won't tolerate any more disrespect toward the young master. Unable to do anything against the knight's authority, Dalton just grumbles in anger and shuts his mouth. Irritated, Dalton runs away and yells that Klein got lucky to survive thanks to his guard knight, calling him a coward, while Dalton walks away throwing a fit. The guard knight stays standing there watching the young man flee. The name of this imposing and protective knight is revealed right after as Dunkel. Later on, during the night, Klein and Dunkel are out in an open field when the MC asks if he has a spare sword. Dunkel complies with the request and hands a standard sword over to the young master. The knight finds it odd and asks why he needs a sword at this hour of the night, but Klein just murmurs thoughtfully, holding the weapon. The boy tries to remember if Delin swung the sword that way, making Dunkel ask if he is referring to the meteor sword. Klein says yes, and asks him to go inside first because he needs to check something, leaving the knight worried about his obsession with swordplay. Dunkel sighs to himself because he knows it is too late since the young master possesses a body completely devoid of energy. He reflects that someone without energy can never become a knight, let alone try to copy the special technique created personally by the Duke himself. Even if someone managed to perfectly recreate the path of the blade, Dunkel believes that mimicking the actual attack would be an impossible feat. Ignoring the guard's thoughts, Klein closes his eyes and realizes that the scene from his brother's practice remains vividly etched in his mind. He recalls with absolute precision every single detail, from the footwork and the leverage on the ground to the exact path of the sword and the flow of energy. At that very instant, the MC's eyes glow once more with that intense and mysterious purple light. Suddenly, Dunkel hears a deafening noise behind him and turns around startled to see what is happening. The knight is completely shocked to feel an absurd amount of power radiating from the area. His eyes widen, gripped by fear, refusing to believe what he is witnessing right in front of him. With a single motion, a massive wave of purple power slices a gigantic boulder right down the middle with absolute ease. Klein remains standing, holding the sword with total calmness, enveloped by a powerful and terrifying purple energy aura. The immense rock splits in two and crashes down with a thud, leaving the veteran knight Dunkel completely speechless. Dunkel stammers in utter shock as he calls out to the young master, while Klein looks at the sword, surprised to see that the copy actually worked. The next day, the maid Erin shows up with a look of absolute astonishment in the middle of the hall. Father Garrison also observes the situation with a tense and surprised look, noticing something out of the ordinary. In reality, they are watching the MC's head being dipped repeatedly inside a bucket full of water. Garrison cheers, saying that the boy can now last over a minute without breathing. While Aaron jokes that the young master has turned into a fish, the priest sarcastically suggests doing the next cleansing ritual in an aquarium. While Klein finally pulls his head out of the water, catching his breath and totally annoyed, Klein complains furiously about the exaggerated time of today's ritual, but Garrison laughs and explains that he felt a very sinister presence coming from his room today. The youth gets annoyed at being bothered for no reason, while Aaron hands him a towel, right when Dunkel enters the room calling for the master. The knight points out that Dalton sent an invitation letter addressed specifically to the young master Klein, dries his hair and asks who sent it. Hearing from Dunkel that the same Dalton from practice wants to apologize for what happened, the MC becomes extremely suspicious, finding it very odd that such an arrogant guy would want to apologize all of a sudden. He opens the envelope to read the contents of the letter carefully and try to understand what is going on. The invitation is for a hunting event, which makes Klein find it even more sketchy to receive this right after the mess at practice. Klein realizes right off the bat that Dalton is just using this hunt as an excuse to lure him out of the estate on the sly. Dunkel asks if the young master intends to go, and Klein replies that there is no reason to turn down the opportunity. He glances discreetly at the corner of the room, thinking that he has one more reason to accept the invitation. The MC knows very well that he now holds a powerful ace up his sleeve to use against any threat. The boy remembers that he replayed Daline's sword movements in his mind over and over again during the last few days. With that, he discovered that he is capable of perfectly copying any sword skill with just a single glance. Although he still doesn't understand the exact reason why he has this incredible ability, he knows he can now use high-level techniques. Dunkel just watches the young master in silence, without imagining the power that the boy is actually hiding. The knight accepts the decision and mentions that he will get the carriage ready for the hunting event. To Klein's surprise, Father Garrison appears out of nowhere and offers to go along, leaving the MC furious with the intrusion. The priest smiles and asks if he hadn't warned him before about the real reason behind his insistence. He looks in a mysterious and serious way, explaining that he felt something unusual and dangerous lingering in the air. That day, Garrison claims he feels a very sinister presence approaching, while the carriage keeps traveling through the forest toward the event. During the bumpy ride in the carriage, Aaron starts feeling very sick due to the jolts of the dirt road. The poor thing lies down nauseous on the priest's lap, while Klein watches the scene in absolute silence. Garrison says he warned her that she shouldn't have come and, with a kind gesture, offers his pillow so she can rest better. He explains that the terrain of the western forest is very uneven and difficult for someone traveling for the first time. Garrison says in a gentle way that she will feel better if she manages to get some sleep. The priest gets all emotional thinking the boy grew up to be a sweetheart, but Klein quickly tells him to just give the pillow to Aaron. The MC goes back to looking out the window, thoughtful and ignoring the wild priest's drama. He reflects in silence on how that region changed drastically over the course of the last 200 years. The boy remembers that in his time, the place was nothing but snow and fallen soldiers, finding it incredible how that frozen land turned into a green forest. Klein keeps observing the landscape with a serious and melancholy gaze, lost in his old memories. He recalls once more Berkel's face, confirming to himself the identity of the knight from the past. Suddenly, the carriage door is opened by the knight Dunkel, catching the young master's attention. The knight announces that they have finally reached their destination, revealing the imposing estate of the Cornwell family. Klein gets down from the carriage and wonders if that is where Dalton lives, while Aaron stays nauseous and feeling sick in the back. The MC notices that the Branch family's manor is even more extravagant than the main manor of the Rhineland house itself. He finds it absurd to spend so much money on a kid's hunt. Realizing how the Branch family has plenty of resources to waste right then, a familiar voice shouts Klein's name, making the MC turn around calmly to see who is calling him. Dalton shows up holding 2 starved hunting dogs and asks with a sarcastic smile what the boy is staring at so intensely. He brags about the size of the manor and says mockingly that they only managed to build all that with the money squeezed from the main family. The young man continues the teasing, saying that a boy who was locked up for 7 years in a monastery would never know how the real world works. Klein notices that the dogs are extremely thin and dryly asks since when hunting turned into small talk time. Dalton calls him impatient, but claims he already knew he would be like that, and that's why he prepared well for the event. He extends his hand and tells the MC to watch very carefully what is about to happen next. The young man warns that the true attraction of the day is about to begin right now and lets go of his starved dog's leashes all at once. Dalton explains that he scattered pieces of raw meat as bait all over the mountainside. He brags that a hungry dog's sense of smell is up to 100,000 times sharper than that of an ordinary human being. The young man pulls his bow and explains that when the hungry animals run desperately after the scent of the target, that's the perfect moment to hunt them, firing a well-aimed arrow right at the very dogs he just let loose. He begins to ruthlessly strike the dogs with his arrows, making the animals cry in pain as they try to run away. Dalton lets out a hysterical laugh and celebrates the success of his cruel hunt in front of his henchmen who just smile. Aaron approaches startled, calling for the young master, catching Dalton's attention, who looks at her with disdain. He recognizes the girl and asks if she is the maid that Klein always drags around everywhere. Dalton grabs Aaron's arm by force and threatens her with a sadistic smile, saying he is going to give her a very different kind of job to do. Suddenly, Dalton feels his arm being grabbed tightly by Klein, who orders him to get his hands off the girl immediately. With his eyes glowing purple and overwhelming power, the MC threatens to break Dalton's arm if he doesn't let her go. Feeling the terrifying pressure, Dalton pulls his arm back, startled by the boy's sudden strength. Annoyed at being intimidated, the young man gets on his horse, complaining that Klein is overstepping his bounds. He adjusts his feet in the stirrups and gets ready to kick off the ride through the forest. Dalton challenges the MC with a provocative smile, telling Klein to follow him into the thick of the hunt. Klein gets on his horse and ignores Dunkel's warning about the danger, telling the knight to wait right there with Aaron and not to follow him under any circumstances. Dunkel tries to insist on going along, but the boy cuts him off by handing an old scroll over to his hands. Looking at the mysterious item, the knight realizes with a start that it is a magical signaling scroll. This scroll is a single-use magical paper that sends signals even without needing energy, reacting as soon as it is torn. Klein whispers that Father Garrison's presence there is very sketchy and warns that if that wild guy vanishes out of nowhere, it will be a big problem. He instructs Dunkel to tear the paper if the priest disappears, which will cause a mark to pop up on the back of Klein's hand to alert him. Saying he is counting on the knight's help, the MC takes off at a gallop, leaving Dunkel behind worried. Night soon falls over the dark forest, while silence takes over the entire hunting area. Klein rides quickly along the dark trail, thinking that Dalton shouldn't have gone too far if he just keeps to the main path. Suddenly, the MC hears a voice amidst the darkness saying that he finally managed to reach the agreed spot. Dalton appears crouching in the middle of the brush with his sword in hand and asks mockingly why Klein took so long. Klein gets down from his horse with total composure and coldly asks what the young man is trying to pull out there in the middle of the night. The MC observes the surrounding scenery with a sharp gaze, noticing something awful hidden among the bushes. He comes across the lifeless forms of the very hunting dogs that Dalton had ruthlessly taken down earlier. Dalton draws his gleaming sword with a sadistic smile and announces that this awful scenery will be the grand finale of today's event. Dalton points his blade directly at the MC and shouts furiously that the last target he is going to eliminate is Klein. Klein asks, surprised if he wants to take him down, and Dalton confirms, saying he is going to take his head to send to Deline. The young man mocks the Rhineland family, calling it a joke and saying it is just an empty shell with no power or justification. Dalton warns that Klein won't even get a chance to fight, while a large group of cloaked henchmen emerges from the shadows. The mercenaries let out evil laughs, while Dalton claims that the duchy belongs to his branch family anyway. The villain tells the boy to curse the fact that he was born into such a foolish family. While the archers get their arrows ready, Klein listens to everything in silence and just murmurs a simple, dismissive, "Oh, right," in the face of all his cousin's threats. Dalton keeps bragging and says that tomorrow everyone in the kingdom will be talking about the fall of the once legendary swordplay family he mocks, saying people will comment that the young master of Rhineland is gone and turned into nothing but dog food. Klein comes across the memory of Berkel, who in the past claimed to fight solely to ensure the future of the Empire's children. Upon remembering that promise from the old hero, the MC's lips curl into an ironic, sarcastic smile. To the surprise of everyone present, the young master starts letting out hysterical laughs right there in the middle of the clearing. Dalton gets extremely annoyed and confused by that unexpected reaction, asking if the boy completely lost his mind. The MC stops laughing all of a sudden and, covering his face with his hand, takes on a terrifyingly cold and intimidating tone of voice. With a dark look, he points out that he is nothing but an insolent brat who dared to cross every acceptable line. Dalton feels a terrible chill run down his entire body upon facing the boy's terrifyingly menacing demeanor. Klein states that this family was built at the cost of his own past fall and questions how his cousin dares to defile its name. Right then, a massive torrent of dark, bluish power suddenly explodes around the MC's body. Dalton panics, asking how he is using magic if he has no energy, but Klein replies that it isn't magic. With a sinister smile amidst that blinding light, he reveals that this mysterious power is actually malevolent, dark energy. The mercenaries get startled, not understanding what is happening, and ask what kind of monster the boy really is. Dalton shakes with fear upon hearing the term dark energy and widens his eyes. Unable to process what is right in front of him, Klein begins to recite an ancient incantation, proclaiming that he commands the evil spirits asleep in the depths of time. He levitates while ordering the souls to rise and return to the light to obey his supreme command. Once more, greenish-blue flames begin to sprout from the ground, bringing along a terrifying whisper that commands to devour everything. Gigantic and terrifying bone structures begin to materialize from that magical smoke covering the entire field. Dalton screams in absolute panic, saying that this is impossible, starting to suspect the true identity of that boy. The army of shadows surrounds the enemies, while Dalton shouts in horror the legendary name of the sorcerer Archimond. With a sadistic smile and pointing his finger at the opponents, the MC orders his creatures to devour them all without mercy. He reflects to himself that he believed he had forgotten all of that after so much time in absolute silence. After all, 200 long years had passed since the last time he had used his terrible powers. He remembers that it was an endless period of empty, meaningless days since his old life had come to an end. Even so, he can still perfectly feel the echo of those laments ringing incessantly in the middle of the darkness. The voices of the fallen keep calling out desperately for his name, summoning him back to the control of the Dark Army. Klein immediately recognizes that old sensation, the familiar resonance, the living memories, and all the power of his dark craft. All that nostalgic and powerful feeling from the past returns with full force to the MC's body. At that very instant, Dalton keeps shouting in despair that this is impossible and refuses to accept what his eyes are seeing. He is paralyzed with fear upon realizing that the legendary fiend Archimond is right there in front of him, controlling the shadows. The boy smiles mischievously and confirms that this was exactly the scary name they used to call him in the past. A strong gust of icy wind blows through the forest, scattering dust and turning up the tense atmosphere of the deadly clash. The assassins start sweating from nerves and shaking, wondering if the legend of the terrible sorcerer wasn't just a mere rumor. They watch, astounded at the army of colossal bone soldiers, rising imposingly right behind the MC. One of the figures lets out a terrifying roar of hatred, ready to tear apart any enemy that dares to step forward. Dalton and his henchmen stay completely speechless for a few moments before that terrifying display of power. However, right after, some of the mercenaries start laughing out loud and making fun of the boy's bone soldier's appearance. They mock, saying he made that whole dramatic pose just to summon weak and useless monsters in the middle of the fight. The henchmen claim they have already destroyed hundreds of similar skeletons in other missions and completely look down on the summoned strength. Laughing out loud, they joke saying they will take the creature's bones as souvenirs after wiping out the MC's army. Dalton regains his confidence from his men's mocking and orders them to first eliminate the creatures blocking the path. The villain tells the archers to clear the way once and for all, and the mercenaries immediately draw back their bowstrings. Ready to shoot, Dalton immediately orders the ranged units to load their weapons to finish off Klein. The mercenaries prepare heavy crossbows with sharp bolts, focusing their aim directly on the creatures. The leader gives the command to fire, and a volley of massive bolts is launched toward the MC. A literal rain of projectiles covers the dark sky and rushes swiftly against Klein and his soldiers' position. The deadly projectiles fall directly on top of the boy, who stays put without showing a single bit of concern. The attack causes a huge explosion of dust and debris on the ground, kicking up a smokescreen across the area. Dalton laughs mockingly and comments that poor Klein must have been completely turned into a pincushion. However, the villain suddenly stops laughing and widens his eyes upon noticing something strange amidst the smoke. As soon as the dust settles, it is revealed that all the enemy projectiles were blocked by gigantic, glowing shields. The bone soldiers use their colossal shields to create a perfect barrier and protect Klein without a single scratch. Klein smiles from the side and thinks to himself that 200 years is indeed a long time. Since nobody there recognizes his creature's power, Dalton's henchmen panic upon seeing that the monsters conjured shields out of thin air in a matter of seconds. The MC comments that they think this way because they assume these are just regular skeletons, leaving the enemies confused. With a sharp and sarcastic look, the boy warns that his personal summons are entirely different. While Dalton shakes from shock, Klein thinks that the old hero Burkell should watch closely what is about to happen now. The boy orders the first unit of bone soldiers to break the defensive formation and move out into action immediately. Klein reflects on the future that Burkell protected by taking him down, seeing those lowlifes now insulting the Rhineland family. Clenching his fist, he decides to crush all the traitors with his own hands and gives the final attack order. The bone soldiers rush forward at a terrifying speed, catching all the mercenaries off guard in the middle of the field. Dalton is horrified to see the monster's speed and yells in despair, asking since when do skeletons run? The creatures let out a gruesome roar as they charge fiercely like a true dark army. The villain tries to reorganize his men by yelling, insisting that they are just weak skeletons, but panic has already taken over everyone. One of the mercenaries is brutally run through by a monster's blade, spitting blood and falling to the ground lifeless. The clash turns into a total one-sided sweep, with Klein's summons slicing through the henchmen who scream in despair. Dalton gets his face splattered with blood and curses in pure terror as he watches his men get decimated. He tries to tell the soldiers to hold the line, while Klein coldly orders the second unit to surround the enemies. Bone archers position themselves on the tree branches around and aim at the mercenaries who are left completely cornered. They ready their crossbows and stand prepared to fire at anyone trying to escape. That deadly trap! The henchmen scream, terrified upon realizing that the creatures also attack from a distance and start running in despair. Without showing the slightest mercy for any of the traitors, Klein simply gives the order to shoot. A new volley of swift arrows is launched from the top of the trees directly against the fleeing targets. The projectiles strike the mercenaries dead on, knocking several of them to the grass with extreme force and precision. Cries of pain echo throughout the dark forest as more and more of Dalton's henchmen fall, fatally injured. The bone soldiers keep attacking and clearing out the fallen enemies, turning the location into a true house of horrors. Dalton is left breaking into a cold sweat, unable to believe that those monsters are way stronger than normal skeletons. Realizing they will be wiped out, he desperately orders the men to drop their bows and switch to close-quarters combat. He yells, asking if they are hearing the orders, but the fury of the battle and the cries of pain drown out his entire voice. Furious and desperate, Dalton charges against one of the monsters to try and prove he can still win that battle. He delivers a violent sword strike against the bone creature, cursing the forces of darkness with all his might. With a precise cut, Dalton manages to take off the monster's head all at once, making the skull roll across the field. The young man celebrates with a hysterical laugh, thinking he finally figured out the weak spot by aiming straight for the head. However, the headless body of the bone soldier keeps moving and delivers a violent counterattack against the surprised villain. Dalton barely dodges and backs away out of breath, not understanding how the creature keeps fighting even after losing its head. Klein just sports a sarcastic smirk on the corner of his mouth and recalls that he had already warned about the difference in his creatures. His personal summons are special and relentless entities, staying on their feet even after suffering supposedly fatal damage. The bone soldier's body calmly bends down, grabs its own fallen skull from the grass, and gets ready to put it back on. To Dalton's absolute astonishment, the monster snaps its head back onto its neck as if nothing happened, revealing Archimond's power. The villain shakes, seeing the skeleton patch itself up, realizing that monsters generated with dark energy don't stay down easily. The giant bone soldier lets out another terrifying roar, acting with smart combat tactics under his master's coordination. The surviving mercenaries fall into absolute despair and curse, in fear upon realizing there is no way to beat those monsters. The enemies shout in despair, not understanding why those bone creatures keep coming back to life even after being smashed. Klein reflects that, with his current body, his summon limit is only 11 skeletons for now. The protagonist sarcastically asks if they want to keep fighting, leaving the surviving mercenaries shaking in fear. The wind blows through the treetops of the forest as the bloody clash goes on ruthlessly. Meanwhile, back at the Cornwell Manor, a cheerful laugh echoes near the large water fountain in the main garden. Aaron asks, surprised if the young master really did that, and Dunkel confirms by telling stories from when Klein was at the monastery. The girl laughs out loud, saying that just imagining the scene is already super fun, while Dunkel just observes her good mood in silence. The veteran knight gives a gentle smile and comments that Aaron seems to highly fond of young Master Klein. With her cheeks stuffed with food, the young maid immediately replies in a cute way that she definitely likes him a lot. She asks if he knows how incredible the young master is, while in the forest the enemies shout desperately, begging Klein to stop Aaron. Comments all proud that Klein is an extremely kind person. While the mercenaries in the forest beg on their knees for mercy, she says the boy is very sweet, but the reality in the forest is a bone soldier ruthlessly cutting a man down. The girl mentions that he even shares his cookies with her. In an absurd contrast to the red liquid splattering in the darkness of the battle, Aaron smiles affectionately and claims with conviction that her young master is hands down the warmest and gentlest person in the whole world. Meanwhile, in the forest, the MC coldly observes the sweep of the enemies with his face totally splattered with red. Dalton's henchmen keep getting overwhelmed by the bone creatures, crying out in agony while the grass gets completely covered. Dalton blocks the monster's attacks with great difficulty, groaning from the physical effort and the despair of being outmatched. He delivers a furious sword strike against one of the skeletons, cursing the creatures that keep coming forward without stopping. However, the villain panics upon seeing that the headless skeleton's head begins to instantly reform with dark flames. Dalton curses the bone monsters and vows in hatred that he will find a way to make sure they can't patch themselves up anymore. He looks past the dark army and focuses his attention on the silhouette of the MC observing everything from afar. The young man realizes that all he needs to do to end that nightmare is eliminate Klein himself, who controls the summons. Dalton leaps fiercely toward the MC with his blade raised, shouting Klein's name with all the strength in his lungs. He roars that the game of playing with targets ends there and guarantees that the entire army will vanish once Klein is gone. The villain delivers a deadly downward strike with his gleaming sword, while the MC remains motionless in the darkness. In that exact millisecond, Klein's eye glows intensely with that mysterious purple power that cracks the air. The MC's eyes fly wide open, revealing that he can perfectly see every move of the enemy's attack. Utilizing the extraordinary ocular power, Klein wields his sword, channeling a massive torrent of purple sparks through the blade. The boy remembers the technique he saw Deline use just once and gets ready to execute it with flawless precision. Dalton widens his eyes in panic as he recognizes his opponent's legendary technique and realizes it is the Rhineland's secret art. The MC masterfully executes the powerful meteor sword, delivering an overwhelming purple slice that cuts through the air and strikes his opponent. Dalton takes a direct hit and coughs up red, while Klein coldly thinks that his cousin won't get off easy after everything he did. with his face stained and his purple eye glowing in the dark. The boy warns in a terrifying way that the real punishment begins now. Dalton collapses to the ground coughing, while the silver-haired boy looks down at him and coldly agrees with his words. The sorcerer agrees that if the caster falls, all summons vanish, remembering how Archimonde was defeated by that very weakness. The MC reflects that fate is truly ironic for giving the powers of the terrible sorcerer Archimonde to an energyless body. He finds it unbelievable that it was precisely the bloodline of his worst enemies, the Rhinelands, that gave him the power to protect them. The blood of his old arch-enemy ended up making the MC even stronger in this new existence 200 years later. The boy warns that, since he was born into this body, he can no longer ignore the situation, leaving Dalton confused as he bleeds on the ground. Very weak and about to pass out, the purple-haired young man asks. Startled what Klein means by all those words, Dalton finally loses consciousness and collapses out cold, while the MC mentally tells the hero Burkel to wait for his return. Klein looks at the forest and vows that he will rebuild with his own hands that Rhineland family, which is currently completely ruined. Meanwhile, in a dark void, Dalton comes to, complaining that it is way too dark and that he can't see a thing. He tries to move his hands, but realizes in horror that he is firmly chained by the arms to a cold metal chair. The young man tries to move his legs, but finds out startled that his feet are also locked by heavy iron shackles in that darkness. Looking around in panic, he notices he is sitting on a sharp iron throne in the middle of a scary, pitch-black void. Dalton shouts, asking what that is, when suddenly Klein's imposing silhouette emerges from the shadows, commenting that he is awake. Archimonde explains that this is the place where souls go as soon as they leave the world of the living, being the afterlife that he himself created. The young man breaks into a cold sweat as he asks if that place is Archimonde's afterlife, and the dark voice coldly confirms he is correct. Klein recalls Dalton's wrongs and says that, during his whole life, he only mistreated and starved his own hunting dogs. The sorcerer accuses the villain of committing terrible cruelties against animals, pretending he was just hunting for fun. Archimonde says he remembers very well the sadistic smile and the fun plastered on Dalton's face while mistreating the creatures. Dalton yells furiously, telling him to stop talking nonsense, and demands that the MC unbind him from that chair immediately. However, the young man suddenly starts sweating cold and pauses for a second to reflect on his current situation. He vividly remembers being sliced by Klein's devastating sword attack just a few moments ago. Dalton wonders how he is whole and without injuries, but Klein warns that he is already gone and that this is just the karma from his past actions. The boy explains that this is the sole purpose of that afterlife, making Dalton shout desperately, demanding to be let out of there. Klein says it doesn't matter if his cousin believes it or not, because what really matters is that the time for final judgment has arrived. The MC extends his hand and warns that the moment has come for Dalton to pay for all his misdeeds. While phantom wolves emerge from the shadows, Dalton widens his eyes and lets out a startled gasp as he notices the spectral beasts snarling hungrily in his direction. Klein tells the villain to listen very carefully to the fierce snarls echoing throughout that scary, dark void. He warns that those are the agonizing cries of all the innocent lives that Dalton cruelly took in the past. The sorcerer coldly declares that this endless suffering is the underworld that the young man himself created with his cruelties. Dalton screams in absolute despair and extreme agony as he gets attacked and torn apart by the phantom beasts in the middle of the darkness. He begs for mercy, crying from the pain, while the spectral dogs consume his soul without a single bit of pity. Back to the reality of the forest, Dalton's lifeless body lies motionless on the ground, with a tear rolling down his stained face. The MC calmly sheathes his sword, observing the tragic and well-deserved end of the traitor in the middle of the dark clearing. Klein stays in silence with a cold and indifferent face, showing zero remorse for what he just did. The bone soldiers surround the young master, when suddenly, one of them raises its head upon noticing the approach of a strange presence. With his hand glowing with magical energy, Klein thanks the creatures for fulfilling their duty and decides to reward their help. He proclaims that he will break the curse, binding their souls to those bones, and finally grant them eternal freedom. The skeletons begin to slowly dissolve into thousands of glowing particles of light that float gently through the air. Klein watches in silence as the luminous dust rises toward the starry sky, clearing the clearing that was previously full of monsters. The MC lets out a low sigh while he sees the last lights completely disappear in the middle of the night's darkness. He reflects that the end should be when bones turn to dust and vanish with the wind, questioning himself for what reason he came back to life. Suddenly, a mysterious voice behind him praises his skill with the dark craft, leaving Klein extremely surprised. The boy turns around tense, wondering to himself if the intruder saw everything, and coldly demands to know who that cloaked man is. The stranger says he doesn't need to know that, while conjuring an extremely bright sphere of green energy in his hand. The cloaked man warns that Klein wouldn't understand even if he explained, and scatters his green magic over the bodies of the fallen mercenaries. The dark power touches the fallen forms scattered across the grass, activating a forbidden spell right before the MC's watchful eyes. At that exact instant, the eyes of one of the fallen mercenaries snap open, glowing intensely with a scary green light. The fallen bodies begin to slowly stand up like soulless puppets under the command of that mysterious sorcerer. Klein observes the scene surprised and immediately recognizes that technique is the art of puppet reanimation to control the fallen. The boy realizes the enemy is a dark caster, while the intruder laughs, commenting that Dalton's fallen men will still be very useful. Back at the Cornwell estate, Aaron lets out a cheerful and fun laugh that breaks the tension of the environment. The girl calls the knight to listen too, guaranteeing that the young master's childhood stories are extremely funny. Dunkel ignores the call, saying he will listen to the accounts later. Focused and tense with the piece of magical paper in his hands, the knight analyzes the signaling scroll and wonders why the young master would use an item made solely for emergency cases. Dunkel notes worriedly that 3 hours have already passed since Klein entered the forest with Dalton, feeling that something very bad went down. Unable to take the waiting any longer, the knight mounts his horse to go after his master, but is blocked by 2 guards from the Cornwell family. The guards say it would be problematic for him to leave his post right now and suggest he wait a bit longer since the hunt is still going on. Dunkel stares at the 2 men with an extremely serious and suspicious look, noticing the bad intention behind that attitude. Upon seeing the Cornwell family crest on their armor, the knight confirms his suspicions that those are Dalton's personal guards. He concludes that they were definitely plotting something and formally introduces himself as the commander of the Rhineland Knights, and Klein's protector Dunkel warns in an intimidating way that he won't stand around if they keep blocking his path, demanding that they step aside. Dalton's guards gulp and start breaking into a cold sweat before the scary pressure exerted by the veteran commander, Aaron, runs over worried, asking if there is something wrong, and Dunkel explains seriously that the master is late and that he is going to look for him now. The commander instructs the girl to return immediately to the main manor accompanied by Father Garrison to ensure her safety. However, Aaron points out surprised that the priest just left without saying a single word, and with a very serious look on his face, Dunkel is shocked to hear that the priest vanished. Remembering Klein's warning to tear the scroll immediately if Garrison disappeared, Dunkel curses furiously while galloping as fast as he can on his horse. He realizes that all of this is definitely not a coincidence and bites his lips from sheer worry. The commander is certain that something terrible is happening to the young Master Klein. Meanwhile, Klein finds himself cornered in the forest by a group of mercenaries led by a cloaked figure. The young master regrets mentally that his dark energy ran out in the last fight, making it impossible for him to use his summons. Facing the imminent danger, Klein gulps and tries to keep his cool under the heavy pressure from his enemies. The cloaked enemy knows he can't last long in that body and orders his lackeys to charge immediately. The subordinates march to eliminate the young master, who is left in shock by the sudden charge. He clenches his fist upon realizing they are using reanimation arts, but warns that they won't beat him just because they use dark arts. At that moment, a glowing mark in the shape of a moon and star emerges, pulsing on the back of his hand. The pack of animated targets charges furiously against Klein, with teeth bared and weapons raised with a confident smile on his face. Klein says that the cloaked jerk is completely done for from now on. The cloaked leader is left completely clueless, and wonders startled what on earth is happening there. Suddenly, a massive beam of golden light crashes down from the heavens with a deafening boom. An imposing figure emerges in the middle of the light explosion, smashing the animated targets with brutal force, surrounded by holy power. He fervently calls for the divine light to manifest in that place. The warrior asks for the light to bring peace to the fallen, while dissolving the enemies that were in his path. He turns around calmly and tells young Master Klein that now he can rest easy without worrying. The cloaked man observes the scene totally in shock and asks with a trembling voice who that intruder could be. The exarch of the Holy Order, Garrison Bjerkman, introduces himself saying they are safe because he has finally arrived. The exarchs are known as 3 human weapons who vowed to faithfully execute the absolute will of the Pope himself. As the ultimate combat force of the Order, only they can wield the holy armaments left behind by St. Gall. Legends say that each of these warriors individually possesses the destructive power of an entire fortress. The cloaked leader groans under the intense pressure of the golden aura that begins to spread. Throughout the forest, the holy power sweeps the battlefield, vaporizing the animated targets instantly with its intense glow. He breaks into a cold sweat and asks, terrified, which of the legendary warriors of the Holy Order is right there in front of him. Garrison asks once more for the young master to relax, because he is the one who holds the title of the strongest in combat. He smiles arrogantly and guarantees that the enemy is facing the most powerful warrior just by him being there. Even before that display of power, the remaining animated targets keep snarling and dragging themselves forward. The pack of creatures leaps madly toward Garrison in a desperate attempt to overpower him somehow. The creatures scream and roar fiercely with their eyes glowing in a bluish, scary tone. The priest coldly raises his heavy book of holy scriptures to begin the penalty of the wrongdoers. He strikes the air with the book, creating a beam of light that cuts through the enemies while ordering the wrongdoers to listen to him. With a terrifying look, Garrison warns that they must beg for the forgiveness of the heavens and start praying while crushing the monsters' heads. He keeps saying he is going to grant them all a baptism of fire. He states in a solemn tone that this cleansing fire will serve to wash away every single one of their misdeeds once and for all. The exarch stomps with extreme force on the ground, cracking the earth and scattering dust across the entire combat area. The violent impact creates a shockwave that kicks up a large amount of debris and dirt around. He keeps clearing out the enemies one by one and calmly declares that this destruction is, in fact, mercy. With his face splattered and wielding his holy book, Garrison coldly decrees that this is the final reckoning. The cloaked leader shakes from terror, finding that insane, and wonders what on earth an exarch of the order would be doing there. He is totally paralyzed, seeing the scale of that colossal power, and realizes he doesn't stand a single chance of winning. Without thinking twice, he bolts away, complaining that things didn't happen the way they had promised him. The runaway keeps rushing desperately, ranting that an absurd power like that can only be a massive joke. In the middle of the wild run to escape his end, the mask covering the man's face falls to the forest floor. However, Garrison appears instantly right behind him and asks in a terrifying way where he thinks he's going. The exarch grabs the man's head with brutal force, making him scream from the pain, while he uselessly begs for a moment. The man, almost out of air, tries to breathe, but Garrison says the prayer isn't over yet and orders him to give thanks for the penalty. While tears stream down the man's wide-open eye, Garrison warns that he must be grateful for the judgment received. Without any hesitation, the priest crushes his head in the name of the divine light, splattering the darkness. Garrison tosses the separated head of the enemy, which goes bouncing across the forest grass. The unmasked head rolls until it stops right by Klein's feet. Garrison calls for young Master Klein with a deeply mysterious and intimidating look. Klein reflects that the exarch simply took a step forward and advanced in an extremely simple manner. But, just with his imposing presence and with the strong wind pressure generated by his movement, more than 20 animated bodies were completely torn to shreds. Right then and there, Garrison extends his stained hand toward the young master in a menacing way. The priest explains that he rushed there as soon as he felt the aura of dark arts in the forest, but hesitates for a split second. He gives an enigmatic smile and comments that this whole situation is quite strange. Garrison places his stained hand on Klein's shoulder and talks about the energy he felt. The priest reveals in an enigmatic way that the evil presence didn't seem to come from the cloaked man. Klein notices his suspicion and starts breaking into a cold sweat upon noticing the true intentions of that jerk. The youth knows that, if he makes a single wrong move, the priest will end him right then and there without hesitation. Fortunately, Commander Dunkel comes riding from afar and shouts desperately for the young master. He approaches in a rush and asks with deep concern if Klein is truly all right. Klein sighs in relief seeing the commander approach and calls him by name. Suddenly, red begins to trickle from his mouth, making him notice that using his dark arts was too much for his weak body. Dunkel panics seeing the young master bleed and shouts for him in a total panic. The commander quickly dismounts from his horse and runs as fast as he can to help the boy. Dunkel asks what happened and whose red liquid all of that is, but Klein asks him to keep his voice down and hold him because his legs gave out. The commander asks startled where Dalton is, while Klein remains in silence with his head down. The young master then coldly reveals that he took care of Dalton once, and for all Klein justifies his action, calmly explaining that his cousin tried to assassinate him in the forest elsewhere. A hand slams with extreme force on the table during an important meeting. Count Delkin Cornwell shouts furiously, questioning if they are really accusing Dalton of trying to assassinate the young master. He argues that his late son was an honorable and loyal knight, finding it absurd that they are trying to frame him after such a tragic end. The Count demands that they focus on finding the real culprit, but Heinkel Rhineland steps in a serene manner. Heinkel shows the official statement and explains that, even after a long interrogation, Klein didn't change a single word. He adds by saying, "There are records of 20 mercenaries sent by the Count at the exact same time, proving Dalton was plotting something." The Count starts sweating cold and stammering, cursing mentally at the idiots who left proof behind. The Count desperately argues that Dalton was a skilled warrior, while Klein never even held a sword in his life. Some nobles whisper in agreement that Klein's own father had already publicly stated that the boy possessed no energy. The Count regrets his son's failure, but knows his own reputation will be ruined if the assassination attempt is confirmed. Decided to shift the direction of the talk, he plans to smear the personal image of the young master before everyone present. He recalls that Klein is the son of the late Duchess Claire, who was surrounded by strange rumors, and that he always claimed to be the legendary Archimond. The Count questions how they can believe a boy like that, but Heinkel loses his patience and tells him to watch his mouth. Delkin accuses Klein of having paid someone to eliminate Dalton, but an imposing voice coming from the entrance orders him to stop immediately. The Count turns around, startled upon recognizing the tone of that striking voice that just interrupted his furious speech. Klein enters the hall under the surprised gazes of everyone and calmly says there are no limits to the nonsense the Count speaks. He reports that he only took Dalton down in self-defense and that Father Garrison showed up to help him against a group of animated targets. The Count accuses the boy of lying through his teeth, but Klein just asks back, in a very sarcastic way, if it is really a lie. With a dark look, he asks if his story of being Archimond is then considered a real fact. Delkin grits his teeth in terror, while Klein mentally remembers the vow he made after taking Dalton's life. The MC vows that he will rebuild with his own hands that Rhineland family and that he won't let any other pest ruin it. He decides to start by eliminating the Branch family jerks, when suddenly knocks on the door interrupt the session. A person with long golden hair opens the doors of the hearing room and offers sincere apologies for being terribly late. This is Laya, the respected commander of the Blue Holy Lance Knights, who just made her triumphant entrance. Also known as my future wife, Klein observes her and wonders, intrigued, what the reason for her being there is, since she also attended the previous swordplay demonstration. The nobles question what the Fall Wyvern family has to do with that case, but Heinkel calmly reveals that he gave her permission. Heinkel explains that Dalton has an old record of performing several important missions for her Knight Order. Heinkel concludes that, for this reason, she also has every right to attend that meeting. He then locks eyes with the MC. Just with that look, I'd fall head over heels. Klein notices they made eye contact, while she gives a slight nod and asks for permission to speak. Laya surprises everyone by asking to speak alone with the young master, who is left confused, not understanding the reason. Heinkel allows the request as long as it's a quick talk, leaving Klein intrigued about why he was the one chosen. Klein's father tells him to go ahead and not take too long, and the boy just agrees, awkwardly. Walking by her side, Klein feels mentally frustrated and wonders why knights always act that way. He soon stops complaining upon realizing that this situation is, in fact, an excellent opportunity. The boy concludes that the commander called him out of suspicion or to test him before replying to his father that he understood the warning. He doesn't care about her true intention and decides he won't back down now that he has already established his main goal. Klein coldly plans to use the Fall Wyvern family's prestige and anything else he can for his own benefit. The commander walks toward Klein and pins him against the wall with those gorgeous legs. Lucky jerk of an MC with Klein cornered against the wall. She asks face to face if she can touch him. If he doesn't want to, I do. Do that to me, please. With his face inches from hers, Klein gets extremely confused and questions if that is really happening right now. Laya Ren Fall Wyvern is the eldest daughter of one of the 3 great ducal families and masterfully commands the Blue Holy Lance Knights. The official records regarding the young commander's combat skills are impressive and show her overwhelming strength. In a past mission, elite monsters charged at her with a fierce roar in an attempt to tear her apart. However, with her eyes glowing blue, she charged at lightning speed toward the enemy pack. She delivered a clean and precise strike with her holy lance, cutting the monster right down the middle instantly during a search operation. Laya single-handedly wiped out all the high-level monsters to ensure the safety of the civilians. She won the battle without getting a single scratch, proving to be a ruthless warrior on the battlefield. The young woman destroyed all the threats in that region by herself without showing the slightest sign of fatigue or difficulty. Back to the present, she asks what Klein is doing standing around and questions why he isn't coming along with her. Klein mentions he is on his way, but asks her not to act close, since they aren't even real blood relatives. Klein recalls that Heinkel explained to him that his aunt married the Duke of Fallwevern, making Laya his distant cousin. However, since she is the daughter of the Duke's first wife, biologically they share no relation and are complete strangers. The commander gets close to him and comments that what she will do from now on is driven purely by her personal curiosity. Before the young man can question, Laya abruptly pulls him by the collar of his shirt, making him let out a gasp of surprise. She gets close, almost touching her lips to his, and repeats the question of whether she can touch him, leaving Klein totally perplexed. The young master stammers confused, asking what she means by that all of a sudden in the middle of the balcony. Ignoring the questioning, Laya orders him to give her his hand first, and holds it firmly without asking for permission. While tracing his hand, she notices a soft and smooth feel, without a single scar or callus, comparing it to a baby's hand. Klein gets tense seeing her massage his hand and reflects that experienced swordsmen don't usually have normal calluses, but rather specific rigid areas. She presses the base of his index finger and thumb, commenting with conviction that the hand's tendons never lie about using swords. With her face very close to his, she goes straight to the point and claims with conviction that Klein definitely didn't use a sword in the fight. She argues that there are no traces of weapon use on his hands, even though he defeated a trained knight and 20 mercenaries. The commander then whispers, asking if he used some different kind of hidden power to manage to survive. Uncomfortable with the exaggerated closeness, Klein firmly pulls his hand away and takes a few steps back. He smirks and asks if she is also going to talk nonsense about him being Archimond, silently realizing the danger she represents. The MC notices that her golden eyes aren't just looking for a sincere answer, but rather testing his physical reaction to the matter. Knowing that silence would be seen as a confession, he decides to be bold and dismissively asks what would happen if he actually were right after. Klein lets out a sarcastic laugh, totally mocking the idea of being the legendary fiend king. Laya smiles amused and plays along with his statement, saying it would be impossible for a little shorty like him to be Archimond. The young master is left in disbelief and repeats in shock the nickname of Shorty that he just received from her. He just stands frozen, mouth open and without a reaction before that woman's audacity to mock his physical height. Klein shakes with anger and asks if she didn't mix up her words, but she dismissively denies it and asks if she needs to repeat it. She insists that he is very small, has bad proportions, a voice with no presence, and concludes by stating plainly that he is a shorty. Even though he knows she is totally wrong, the emotional damage of the insult hits him square on while she keeps talking about him. Laya then turns around and makes an unusual offer, promising that she will let him kiss her if he manages to defeat an official knight. He wonders why she would give such a permission and jokes mentally that her rational judgment is a lost cause. While she says goodbye, mentioning that it's already late, Klein stays thoughtful, not knowing if that is a political tactic or a bribe. She pauses for a moment, admiring the beautiful evening view before moving on with her reasoning. Laya reflects to herself that the legendary Archimond would never act or behave in that manner. The guard announces out loud to the whole hall that young Master Klein and Lady Laya are returning to the room. Klein admits to himself that he was way too complacent, acting just like the problematic son who was locked up for 7 years. He knows nobody would easily believe he took Dalton down in self-defense. When the Count calls him in a serious way, Heinkel takes the floor and firmly asks what exactly the two debated during their private talk. Klein walks with determination and wields one of the swords from the place, leaving Commander Laya intrigued by the attitude. He wields the blade with ease and raises it before everyone present, showing total steadiness in the move. The council nobles, Heinkel and Laya, widen their eyes in extreme shock at the young man's sudden action. Pointing the weapon directly at Delkin Cornwell, the boy decides that he himself must prove his strength to everyone there. Klein orders the Count to stop wasting time and resolves to propose that they settle that dispute like men, the northern way. He openly challenges his opponent to a face-to-face clash through a traditional trial by duel. The audience goes wild, and the Count stammers in disbelief upon hearing the bold proposal to settle everything by fighting. This old method is used in the North to settle difficult standoffs, where the winner of the duel sets the final verdict with no rules. Delkin finds the challenge way too sudden, but Heinkel steps in, declaring that the youth's justification is more than enough. Klein exposes that, besides the proof of assassination plots against Dalton, the Count tried to frame him and even insulted him and his mother. Internally, he knows his true identity as Archimond, and that he holds no real feelings for the mother of that life. Delkin tries to argue to postpone the situation, but Klein impatiently demands that the Count make his choice right then and there. Klein asks if he will make everyone wait, while the nobles whisper anxiously to see the old duel tradition. Once again, Heinkel declares that, since it is a heritage from the first generation, he guarantees everything will be decided by the outcome of this clash. He decrees that all evidence presented up to that point will be voided, making the Count realize a new chance is showing up. Delkin celebrates mentally that great chance. While some wonder if Klein will be all right since he has no energy, the Count smiles evilly as he warns that he will send another knight as his champion and mentally vows to take the boy's life. Klein scoffs at the threat, warning him to remember Dalton's end, and mentally guarantees that the Count himself is the one who will fall. Delkin officially accepts the challenge, setting the fight for 4 days from then. But Klein thinks that this is just the beginning of everything. The young man plans to use the Cornwell family as a stepping stone to show all the Branch family jerks who's boss. He wants to prove how he intends to tear that entire family apart to later rebuild it under his absolute rule. In another room, a furious shout echoes against the wall, completely rejecting that absurd idea. Deline shouts upset, asking if Klein completely lost his mind and if he has a real grasp of the foolish thing he is proposing to do. Deline warns anxious that he could end up finished in the arena, but Klein just lets out a bored sigh, saying he is already well aware of that. The boy asks his brother to just accept the situation, since their father gave permission, leaving Deline completely perplexed by the news. Deline offers to fight in his brother's place, using the champion system rules, but Klein turns down the offer immediately. Klein explains that their rule exists solely thanks to the overwhelming strength of their father and Deline, the prodigy brother who will inherit everything he tells his brother to snap into reality once and for all, questioning why the main heir should risk himself in his place. The young master points out that doing so would give the enemies a perfect and totally legal chance to eliminate the true heir. He recognizes Deline's obvious frustration, but mentally reiterates that he needs to fight to clear his name and change his bad reputation. Klein warns that he won't back down from that fight. While the older brother affectionately remembers when the young master was born, Deline recalls with deep nostalgia the immense joy he felt running without stopping to meet his tiny newborn little brother. He remembers holding that delicate little hand and seeing a true angel up close for the very first time. That was one of the purest and most striking memories of his entire childhood inside the family's massive manor. He declares with emotion that he doesn't care about the fact that they have different mothers and regrets that his brother came back from the order just to run into danger. Suddenly, the heir grabs Klein's shoulders firmly, catching the young master totally by surprise with the physical reaction. With tears streaming from his eyes, Deline begs, sobbing, for his younger brother to listen to his words carefully. Klein observes him in shock, completely not understanding why the young man is crying in such a desperate way for him. Deline tries to speak, but is cut off by Dunkel, who opens the doors, announcing in a respectful way that he has an important notice. The commander apologizes for the sudden interruption and notices to the brothers that Count Cornwell finally chose his official champion. Klein acts natural and asks what kind of warrior the Count chose. And the commander reveals that the man is called Randall Dunkel, explains seriously that the opponent is a feared ex-knight banished from the Empire who gained immense fame in bloody battles. The wooden doors of a tavern slowly open with a quite sinister creak. Dunkel begins to reveal to Klein and Deline the true and scary reason why the ex-knight was banished. Meanwhile, a dark and strong drink is slowly poured inside a wooden mug. The reason for his banishment was the fact that he possessed an uncontrollable and unhealthy urge to take people's lives. Amidst the bodies of the fallen scattered across the tavern, the giant Randall drinks down all the alcohol in one single go. The mercenary smiles cruelly upon learning he will face Klein, commenting that it's been a long time since he heard a little boy's cries shortly before the fight. A servant hands the young master the standard sword he had requested for the duel. The man notes that he forged it exactly according to his instructions, but anxiously asks Klein to take extreme care. The smith alerts that this standard weapon will shatter instantly the moment it collides with an energy-infused blade. Klein just murmurs that it's perfect and readies himself with determination, declaring it is time to start that dispute. The boy positions himself firmly at the entrance of the combat arena, under the wind blowing hard at that moment. The crowd in the large arena shouts in surprise upon spotting Klein Rhineland actually entering for the life-or-death match. Count Delkin Cornwell bursts into laughter and mocks, saying he really didn't expect the young master to show up in person. He scoffs, wondering if the young man will be all right. Since Randall is an experienced Imperial Knight and an impossible enemy for someone with no energy, Delkin slyly implies that maybe Heinkel should send Deline to fight in his brother's place to avoid a tragedy. In the middle of the field, Klein ignores the outside talk and looks around, searching for his opponent's whereabouts. He concentrates focused, waiting for the exact moment when his rival will finally reveal himself before the public. The young master wonders if the opponent hasn't shown up yet, without noticing that a gigantic silhouette is already rising right behind him. With a sudden boom, the massive mercenary delivers a devastating punch toward Klein Rhineland's back. The giant Randall introduces himself with a bizarre smile on his face and asks in an ironic tone if that young man is the famous young master. Randall comments with disdain that the heir is actually much younger and more fragile than he imagined from the rumors. The giant mocks his thin arms and legs, saying he can't wait for the snap he will hear when he breaks his neck. In the final millisecond, Klein performs an acrobatic move and dodges by leaping backward with impressive reflexes. The audience watches in shock at the swift dodge and wonders, surprised if the boy just got away from his back with such ease. Delkin points to the arena laughing and asks Duke Heinkel how his son will endure the duel if he already started running out of fear. Randall also lets out a smirk, commenting out loud that the young man already looks completely terrified right at the start. Klein lets out a click with his tongue and admits to himself that this sudden scare really caught him off guard. He reflects that the approach made him remember that wild priest's scary hand on his shoulder, making him hesitate out of pure reflex. In the stands, Laya observes in silence, thinking he will have no way out. While Randall plans to rip Klein apart for good, she keeps her golden eyes fixed on the arena, coldly analyzing the fighting stance of both combatants. The guard warns that Helion will be mad and suggests they head back, but Laya scoffs, stating that that woman isn't even her real mother. She focuses on the young man and remembers the alluring promise she made him to grant her lips if he beats that knight in the back of her mind. The commander knows she also holds an important personal suspicion she needs to confirm in this duel. Feeling extremely embarrassed for backing away like that, Klein clears his throat and tries to pull himself back together as fast as he can. Suddenly, Randall extends his monstrous arm again and gives a bold little pat on the young master's shoulder. Klein completely loses his patience, calls the mercenary a total freak, and asks irritated if his ears are made of muscle. Klein adds in a biting way, stating with scorn that there is definitely a great reason why the Empire discarded him. The giant flies into a rage at the insults, grinds his teeth, and whispers that the filthier the young master's mouth is, the louder he will scream in pain when the true torture begins, delivering right after a furious punch with all his strength, right before getting smashed. The boy triggers a quick release mechanism on his outfit with a sharp click. Randall's massive fist collides violently against the arena, destroying the ground and scattering boulders everywhere. The brutal impact creates a huge crater with a gigantic screen of smoke and dust around the hit spot. When the dust begins to settle, Randall looks down confused upon realizing he didn't feel the impact of crushing the boy. He notices surprised that he is holding only Klein's empty black overcoat, who managed to slip out of his coat in the last second. The public falls into a total panic with that display of superhuman strength, but soon some begin to point to the other side. The nobles ask themselves, startled, if young Master Klein simply vanished from the combat arena without a trace. However, light and precise steps echo through the dust mist right behind the giant Randall. Klein resurfaces in the middle of the smoke, wearing only his red combat vest and wielding his sword with total elegance. He complains mentally about the opponent's gross behavior and recognizes it will be quite tough to face him directly. Klein knows that if he takes a single punch from that monster, it will be his end. Concluding he will have to use unconventional tactics to win, Deline notices that his brother dodges very well, but worries about how he plans to win like this, since any scratch will break his bones. The heir thinks that this isn't real fighting, but rather walking slowly toward his own grave, whispering worried for Klein. He remembers his brother warning that fighting in his place would give the legal chance to eliminate the heir, knowing Klein acted right but hurting over it. However, seeing another violent punch from Randall explode against the earth, the older brother's despair only increases. Randall delivers a series of brutal attacks with his immense blade in an attempt to slice the young master all at once. With his eyes glowing in a mysterious purple tone, Klein coldly analyzes the path of the enemy's attack. The boy slips away from the devastating strike with a scary ease and swiftly counterattacks. With a sharp collision sound, Klein dodges by a hair and performs a precise cut on the opponent's defense. He lands gracefully, dragging his standard blade along the ground, creating a strong wave of dust and debris in the air. Dunkel shouts anxious for the young master, while the enraged Randall instantly readies another smashing punch. Randall shouts asking if Klein thinks he will win just by dodging, while the boy blocks the blow with his blade. The mercenary mocks in a psychopathic way, demanding that the boy at least show some of his famous dark arts. He presses Klein's blade with an absurdly high strength, mocking him for being from one of the most powerful and noble bloodlines of the North. With anger and a dark aura rising, the young master thinks about how it would be easier to simply eliminate everyone there with his dark craft. Feeling a sudden change in the air, the big guy Randall gets genuinely startled and widens his eyes, not understanding the situation. Out of pure survival instinct, the mercenary hastily leaps backward to create distance from the boy. The crowd murmurs surprised to see the giant back away, theorizing that he would just be giving a slight edge to the young master. However, Randall breaks into a cold sweat and wonders what on earth he just felt, since there was no visible power around. The mercenary panics upon feeling the presence of a sinister and overwhelming power radiating directly from Klein's body. Count Delkin, Cornwell begins to despair, not understanding the reason why Randall is acting in such a hesitant way. Duke Heinkel Rhineland just observes the fight in complete silence, keeping his eyes focused on every detail of the duel. Klein calmly tells his opponent not to worry, because he won't use his dark arts by any means during the match. The boy proudly declares himself a legitimate Rhineland, stating he will prove his worth there using only swordplay. Upon hearing that he won't use dark magic, Heinkel and Deline are highly surprised by the honor shown by Klein. The bold and heroic declaration of the young master makes the entire crowd in the stands cheer and shout his name. The Count tries to hide his nervousness by laughing out loud and praising the duel, but soon goes back to sweating cold with the tension of the room. The giant Randall listens to the crowd's shouts praising Klein and remains in absolute silence with sweat dripping down his face. He tries to convince himself that it was just a coincidence and that his stamina and physical strength are still infinitely superior. He remembers that the young master possesses no energy, mentally claiming that true imperial swordplay only exists with magical power. The warrior activates his body techniques that control breathing, muscles, and blood flow to expand his senses. With a smashing explosion of reddish power, Randall leaps high into the skies to deliver the decisive blow from above. He utilizes his instant explosive strength to hunt his target and roars in hatred. Ordering the heir of the Rhinelands to fall, Klein positions himself calmly for the collision, while a gigantic blade of destructive energy plummets in his direction. With his eyes glowing and copying everything, Klein reveals in thought that he can already perfectly read his technique and energy. The ex-knight shouts with all the rage in his lungs as he brings down his devastating attack that promises to split the earth in two. Klein dodges by a fraction of an inch from each red beam of power. Perfectly analyzing the path of his blade, Randall flies into a rage upon missing the hit and roars furious, calling the young master an insignificant fly for continuing to dodge. The monster tries to deliver another devastating strike at point-blank range, ordering once more that Klein fall right there. Randall's new charge smashes the ground with such violence that it kicks up an immense screen of dark smoke across the arena. The dust begins to clear out slowly across the arena under the watchful eyes of the entire anxious audience present. In the middle of the mist, the mercenary focuses his vision and is extremely in shock to notice that he missed the target again. He panics upon noticing the boy's disappearance, wondering if Klein really read all his sword paths so fast. At that instant, Klein emerges falling gracefully from the skies right behind the giant, with his blade prepared to deliver the blow. He smiles victorious and warns the enemy that, with a gigantic body like that, his back is left completely exposed to danger. Klein delivers with surgical precision the legendary meteor sword technique, slicing the opponent's back with swift purple cuts. Deline and Heinkel widen their eyes in complete awe as they immediately recognize the secret meteor sword technique. Randall lets out a deafening cry of pain upon feeling the devastating impact slicing his back all at once. The mercenary despairs upon noticing the boy's strength, not understanding how on earth he is able to execute that technique with no energy. In the stands, Laya's guard stands totally paralyzed and asks perplexed if she also just witnessed that Commander Laya remains static, mouth open, completely marveled by the young master's display of skill. Heinkel reflects that, under normal situations, he certainly would have considered stepping in personally in that dispute. He remembers having told Dunkel that he shouldn't act out of emotion because his intervention would tarnish the family's prestige even more. Heinkel comments that the opponent is an imperial knight and that Klein could never beat him, making Dunkel question why he allowed the duel. Heinkel explains sadly that Klein is just a boy defending the honor of his late mother, whom he himself couldn't save in the past. The Duke squeezes his own hands with bitterness and regrets that, at the end of the day, he isn't capable of protecting anything or anyone. He regrets not being able to protect his children or his family, but Dunkel calmly asks for him not to worry about that. The experienced Commander Dunkel silently recalls the young Master Klein's recent and enigmatic behavior. He knows very well that the boy possesses a unique wisdom and that he would never enter a battle he couldn't win. Back to the present in the arena, Heinkel watches the scene totally dumbfounded and calls softly for his son Klein's name. The swordplay of the Rhineland family became famous in the north for reducing energy consumption to the absolute limit to survive the extreme cold. The narrator explains that, while imperial combat techniques function in an aggressive way like a lion's hunting style, completely crushing the opponent all at once through the violent release of an immense amount of accumulated energy, the classic swordplay of the Rhineland family acts in a totally opposite and subtle way, focusing on the extreme moderation of power. It is a refined art of pure precision and containment, comparable to the quiet and focused flight of a hunting eagle. Their style basically consists of focusing on the constant search for the opponent's openings while using the absolute minimum of energy. In simple terms, it is an extreme and highly technical swordplay that seeks to obtain the maximum efficiency possible with almost no power. Klein reflects smiling that this is the reason he manages to use the family techniques even without possessing energy. Though he has less physical strength, the boy guarantees that this contained power is more than enough to crush a low-level warrior like Randall. Feeling extremely humiliated, the ex-knight grinds his teeth and roars in hatred, calling Klein a filthy rat. He lets out a deafening shout while releasing an immense amount of reddish magical power across the entire battlefield. The giant's muscles expand in a scary way as he prepares to deliver his most dangerous technique of all everyone in the eye. Arena watches perplexed and startled upon realizing that Randall's legendary secret technique has finally been activated. It is a devastating burst of power that is capable of instantly paralyzing and blocking the opponent's moves. Randall shouts furious, telling the young master not to make him laugh, guaranteeing with anger that the only winner of that duel will be him. He charges in a free-fall with fists clenched against Klein Rhineland, bellowing that the boy is completely finished. Deline despairs upon seeing the brutal charge and shouts with all his strength for his brother to take extreme care. The mercenary delivers his strongest attack, covering the field with a scary explosion of red flames and smoke. A screeching sound of metal clashing echoes through the environment, while bright sparks fly everywhere. In Klein's mind, the words of the smith handing over the weapon and alerting about the fragility of the standard blade echo once more. The smith had warned that, at the exact millisecond that standard sword collided against a weapon full of energy, the blade's structure wouldn't handle the heavy magical pressure and would break immediately under the violent impact of the blow. The monster smiles with malice upon seeing the piece of the blade shatter, being absolutely sure that victory is already his. Randall breaks into laughter, calling Klein pathetic upon seeing his weapon break, but suddenly something very strange happens. Klein gives an enigmatic smile with his eyes glowing purple and warns that, in fact,
his secret technique has finally been completed. The young master calmly reveals that the true weapon designed to hunt and destroy the mercenary is now ready. The image of a lion emerges before a delicate feather that floats gently through the air, symbolizing moderation over brute force. On the ground, the massive shadow of a hunting eagle projects itself in a menacing way over the lion, completely dominating the landscape. Klein performs a quick and quiet cut with the broken hilt of his sword,
making red liquid spray violently into the air. With extreme precision, he takes off Randall's right arm in a single swift move of pure, shimmering purple light. The giant's immense hand falls heavily against the arena floor, along with his own combat weapon in the middle of the field. Duke Heinkel Rhineland watches that entire scene in absolute silence and solemnly decrees that it is already enough. The master of ceremonies announces out loud to the entire shocked public that the traditional trial by duel has come to an end. Dunkel reflects perplexed that, even without energy, Klein managed to perfectly reproduce the steps and the complex path of the sword. The commander notices startled that the young master planned to break his own sword on purpose to manage to deliver that blow. Before that impressive combat genius, Dunkel proudly concludes that it was an absolutely brilliant victory for Klein. The mercenary writhes in pain, holding the bleeding stub of his severed arm, shouting desperately for his lost hand on the ground. Several healers of the order rush desperately toward the injured man in an attempt to contain the bleeding as fast as possible. They shout, asking for help to hold Randall while conjuring sleep spells to calm him down in the middle of all that commotion. Klein just observes the rush from afar with his hand on his chin and asks with total curiosity if they can reattach the arm. One of the healers replies, startled that it involves simple restoration and that they will have to create a prosthetic, leaving the boy kind of disappointed. The protagonist regrets in silence that, even after 200 years, restoration magic has barely evolved, while Heinkel walks in his direction, calling him Heinkel, looks deep into the boy's eyes and directly asks if he really feels nothing seeing a body mangled in that way. Klein gets startled, realizing he acted way too coldly, and remembers, cursing in thought, that at the moment he needs to pretend he isn't Archimond. The boy decides to play shy, scratching his head, and fakes a stammer, thinking if he should show fear to keep up his disguise as a weak youth. In the stands, Count Delkin Cornwell falls into complete despair, unable to accept that they spent a fortune to hire a knight who lost. Heinkel demands with authority that Count Cornwell accept his defeat and fulfill the winner's demands, but the man shouts, refusing the deal. The Count bellows furious that he already lost both his beloved son Dalton and his personal elite knight in that terrible duel. The man collapses and coughs desperately, not understanding how things reached that tragic point for his family. At that moment, Klein glares at him from the corner of his eye with his evil purple glow and menacingly whispers Delkin Cornwell's name. The Count feels a shocking chill go up his spine and stands totally paralyzed under the boy's invisible pressure. Delkin tries to breathe but gets lost in panic upon noticing that his body no longer responds to his commands. While the Count tries to figure out what is happening with his neck, Klein approaches and declares that, as the winner of the duel, he will give his orders. The boy coldly orders the man to confess all his sins before the Lord of the North and get on his knees to beg for forgiveness. Klein demands that he bow his head for mercy and decrees that the Count will be completely crushed by the colossal weight of his own misdeeds. He guarantees in a dark tone that the traitor's regret and his suffering for his wrongs will last for all eternity. The scary spiritual projection of the Fiend King, Archimond, rises behind Klein, exerting an overwhelming spiritual force over the Count. Totally terrified and feeling his mind break under that cursed pressure, Delkin begins to shout and cry out of pure despair. The proud man collapses completely and bows on the arena floor, begging for apologies in an extremely humiliating way. The Count confesses in tears that he and his son dared to plot against Klein, under the effect of the voice of the fallen that summons lost souls for the living. This secret art of dark magic generates an extreme and uncontrollable dread, making the man beg for forgiveness repeatedly. Delkin cries, confessing that he also insulted Claire, the late mother of the young master, having his mind completely wrecked by that penalty. The nobles in the stands watch perplexed, not believing that one of the largest pillars of the branch families collapsed in that way. Klein observes the defeated enemy and reflects satisfied with his victory that, in fact, his real plan is just starting right now. The youth raises his broken sword hilt and demands in a loud voice that everyone present pay close attention to his official announcement. He introduces himself with authority as the challenger and the rightful winner of that traditional trial by combat of the ducal family. The boy proudly proclaims that he is the biological son of the late Claire of Elasis, the respected marquise consort of that bloodline. He completes by declaring that he is also the second son of Heinkel Rhineland, widely known as the most powerful knight in all the north. Klein raises his fist to the heavens and shouts with all his determination for the large arena to hear that his true name is Klein Rhineland. Meanwhile, in a distant and quiet place, the large wooden doors of a holy cathedral are slowly opened. At the altar, Garrison devoutly prays, asking for the God of Light to never pull his will away from them, even if the path is arduous and painful. The fervent priest joins his hands and cries in deep prayer for the God of Light. Before the imposing stone statue of the temple, Garrison notices a presence and calls for Cardinal Muroc, who emerges in the shadows of the place, calmly confirming his own name. The cardinal notices Garrison's tense voice and asks what happened, and the priest reports that the target under watch was attacked by a dark caster. Muroc replies calmly that there is no reason for concern, because that entire situation occurred exactly as planned by them. The cardinal reveals that the cloaked caster was sent in cooperation with the Empire, because these entities spread absolute terror. He coldly explains that people scared by the dread of their end will inevitably seek divine salvation in their religious order. Muroc asks for Garrison to understand that the sacrifice of a few people is justifiable to revitalize the order and spread the divine will. Garrison completely loses his patience before that hypocrisy and delivers a violent punch against the traitor cardinal's face. The priest holds him with fury and accuses him of having fallen into a cheap political game to the point of making pacts with the most despicable heretics. Muroc tries to stammer desperate, asking what he is saying, but is choked hard by the holy warrior's ruthless hand. With his eye wide with pure dread, the corrupt cardinal tries to let out a last and useless whisper, begging to be saved from there. Garrison crushes his head without hesitation, and red liquid splatters violently, staining the face of the immaculate angel statue of the temple. The lifeless body collapses to the floor while the red liquid trickles down the priest's hands, who remains standing, facing the trail of his penalty. Suddenly, a voice coming from the church entrance asks in a relaxed way if the holy warrior is finally feeling better. The newcomer walks over the fallen, commenting that Garrison remains the same, and that he eliminated more priests than the Darkcaster himself. The man smiles and introduces himself as Palamon L, the great archbishop of the Holy Order who came to bring new directions to that situation. Garrison Bierkman glares at him seriously, and coldly asks if all that conspiracy and loss of life was the archbishop's doing. Palamon denies it in a cynical way, saying he only granted the necessary permission and that he brought valuable info to share. The archbishop reveals in an enigmatic way that the new data he obtained is specifically about the young master that Garrison was monitoring. Before the revelation and the superior's challenging tone, Priest Bierkman clenches his fists and silently readies himself for what is to come. Palamon explains that the use of dark arts always leaves traces, which leaves Garrison quite surprised. He shows a flask in the shape of a cross and reveals that that object belonged to the Darkcaster that Garrison eliminated. The Archbishop details that the object contains a body reanimation magic researched by the Empire and a technique that manipulates souls. Garrison questions if that really would be the origin of the dark craft. And Palamon confirms seriously. Palamon concludes that this discovery means there were two different Darkcasters at the scene of the incident. The Archbishop asks for Garrison to pay close attention to what he is going to say next. He mentions the second young master of the Rhineland family, who was precisely the target watched by the priest. Palamon prepares to reveal the true identity of the young boy. He directly reveals that Klein Rhineland is actually a dark caster, deeply shocking the priest. Meanwhile, a heavy rain falls over a dark forest in the middle of the night. Someone strikes a rock with a pickaxe, making sparks fly in the darkness. A miner works hard under the rainy night, striking the shining stones repeatedly. He sighs in relief for the break, without noticing that a massive dark claw emerges right behind him. The worker turns around, startled upon feeling the scary presence right behind his back. A desperate cry echoes through the dark and rainy valley in the middle of that forest. The small, red-haired maid gets nervous and says to herself that this is a disaster. She gets desperate upon realizing she ended up sewing a doll with the face of her young master. The boy just reads at his desk while a week passes since the terrible trial. By combat, Klein recalls his victory over Randall and how he extracted the Count's confession using his dark magic. He thought he would finally be recognized by everyone after announcing his existence before the entire Allied faction. The problem is that his 15-year-old body has no physical stamina, and he tells the maid to go to sleep if she's already done playing. The girl complains that he is mean and always plays alone, but Klein fires back, saying he is just reading. She teases, saying that reading a romance novel is basically playing around, leaving the boy totally speechless. He flips through the pages, thinking that the cover really looks like that of a regular romance book. However, the inside is filled with secret notes on anatomy and spells geared toward the dark craft. He reflects that his current body can only summon 11 skeletons and that he will need to research more about this. Klein knows that the biggest problem is Father Garrison, needing to recover his power before the religious man figures him out. Heinkel shows a report on mysterious sightings that have been occurring inside the mines of the region. The document reports sightings of animated targets, and Klein notices right away that this is his big chance. The youth immediately volunteers to go there, thinking that real combat is the best form of research. Heinkel worries and asks if he will be all right. Since there were reports of severe losses at the location, Klein guarantees there will be no problems, seeing that as an opportunity linked to the attack he suffered before the boy wanted to use his dark craft alone. But Dunkel appears, warning that the Duke ordered him to accompany him camped under the starry sky. Dunkel praises the night view, while Klein silently regrets the company. The knight offers a warm meat skewer to his young master, who thanks him politely. Dunkel calls the boy in a friendly way while holding his own piece of grilled meat. Klein eats in silence and thinks that he should also help with some task during the camp out. The boy sees the completely charred skewer and realizes his help in the kitchen actually only gets in the way. Klein finds out that Dunkel, despite being the commander of the knights, is completely useless at cooking. Dunkel gets extremely embarrassed by the mistake, but Klein tells him to forget it and that he will make more meat. The young master thinks that cooking is easy for him, since he spent more than 10 years doing domestic chores. The experienced knight observes the boy with admiration while savoring the well-prepared food. Dunkel comments that he finds the young master very mature and different from other boys his same age. The knight jokes, saying he even looks like the reincarnation of the legendary fiend Archimond. Startled, Klein seriously warns the guard to never repeat that foolishness in front of any priest. Dunkel recalls that Archimond was the terrible fiend who turned millions of people into animated targets. Suddenly, a strong and icy wind blows the campfire flames in a scary way. Dunkel feels the cold and strange breeze, but Klein immediately notices that it isn't just wind. With a terrifyingly serious look, the young master orders the knight to never touch upon that subject again. Dunkel gets confused and a bit startled by his young master's sudden and intimidating reaction. Dunkel draws his sword immediately upon hearing a scary cry echoing in the forest. The desperate shout comes from a nearby village, which seems to be under attack in the dead of night. The residents flee in absolute panic upon realizing they are being chased by animated targets. The scary creatures charge snarling with fury against anyone trying to get away from them. Dunkel quickly emerges to defend the people, cutting down the monsters with swift sword strikes. He gets startled and shouts for his young master upon noticing a new threat approaching. But Klein is already acting and delivers a precise sword strike, slicing an animated target right down the middle. The young master glares at the commander coldly and asks what he is waiting for to take action. Klein orders the knight to go save the residents, and Dunkel immediately obeys the command. The head of one more of the monsters falls inert to the ground after being defeated by the prodigy boy. The villagers thank him for the help and are shocked to learn that Klein belongs to the powerful Rhineland family. While Klein walks away in silence, Dunkel asks the villager, since when these creatures showed up, Klein analyzes the bodies and confirms that reanimation magic is the same one that attacked him in the forest. The man stammers, explaining that the disappearances started 2 months ago after the Count closed off access to the mine. The resident reveals that the animated targets were the local residents themselves, leaving Klein surprised. Another villager steps forward and grabs Klein by the shoulders, desperately asking if he is really a Rhineland. The man demands an answer while Dunkel approaches annoyed, telling him to let go of the young master. The resident shouts outraged that he asked for help for 2 whole months without receiving a single response from them. He points furiously to the animated targets that were just defeated on the ground of that square. The young man cries upon revealing that one of the defeated creatures was his father, who just worked in the mine. He shouts in pure despair and tears, questioning the reason why they need to go through so much suffering. Klein just observes him in absolute silence, absorbing all that terrible and painful reality. Suddenly, the souls of the fallen begin to whisper Archimond's name on a spiritual frequency. Klein thinks with coldness that they are making too much noise and that none of that is truly his fault. The young resident widens his eyes upon feeling the oppressive aura of the young Rhineland before him. Klein says it wasn't him who transformed those people, and that the young man should direct his anger at the right target. Dunkel says he will handle everything there, while Klein begins to summon bluish spiritual flames in his hands. The knight is amazed while the boy recites an old spell to guide the innocent spirits. The villagers panic seeing the bodies glow, but the boy keeps declaring that he will fulfill their wish. Enveloped by an intense blue power, Klein orders with authority that the spirits follow his lead. With that, the bodies of the deceased begin to transform into pure and glowing spiritual flames. Countless bluish souls rise floating toward the night sky before the eyes of everyone there. The spirit of the young resident's father appears smiling with serenity for finally finding peace. Klein observes in silence while the souls communicate and say goodbye to this plane of existence. The young master sports a slight smile and whispers, in a calm way, that he understood their message. Dunkel stands mouth open and startled, recognizing that this is a soul resonance. The knight remembers that this old spell was used 200 years ago to free the souls from the plague. The young resident cries, seeing the floating spirit of his late father say goodbye to him. All the souls rise, glowing intensely, until they completely disappear into the vastness of the sky. Sometime later, Klein and Dunkel walk alone toward the mountain under the moonlight. The young master remembers the villagers' instructions about the correct path to get to the mine. Dunkel breaks the silence and bashfully asks what Klein was talking about with the spirits. The boy hesitates for a moment and replies, pretending it was nothing of much importance. He calmly explains that the fallen only thanked him for helping them rest in peace. But right after, Klein reveals that the souls also begged for him to avenge them. Dunkel repeats the word vengeance in a thoughtful tone, surprised by the young master's words. The knight immediately recalls the joke he made and Klein's terrifyingly serious reaction. The commander slowly begins to place his hand on the hilt of his sword. Preparing for something, he draws his shining blade and points it directly at Klein's back, asking who he really is. Dunkel wonders if that boy before him is truly the real young master, Klein Rhineland. Dunkel recalls that the cursed boy returned to the estate after spending 7 years confined in a monastery. He found that dark and empty look disturbing, something hard to believe coming from such a small child. Dunkel wonders if everything would have started on that fateful day when a scream echoed through the manor. 2 maids were completely terrified upon finding a fallen cat in the estate's kitchen. Shortly after, another lifeless animal emerged in the backyard, and a third appeared the next day. The bodies kept appearing day after day, adding up to a disturbing total of 7 fallen cats. Back then, the rumors spread, and everyone started to suspect a single and cursed bloodline. But, oblivious to the whispers and the tense atmosphere, the young master just spent his days calmly observing through the window. Dunkel thought that, being very young, the little boy had no relation to those grim incidents until, on a quiet night, the knight heard the creak of a door opening in the manor's hallway. Quiet steps echoed through the dark place, while a lit lantern slightly illuminated the path. Dunkel was quite intrigued to see little Klein walking alone through the manor in the middle of the darkness. The commander decided to follow him in silence, wondering where the boy would go at that hour of the night. The boy kept moving forward calmly with his lantern in hand, without making any unnecessary noise. The knight noticed that the little master carried a sheathed dagger at his waist. The 2 walked along a stone trail surrounded by dense vegetation under the light rain. A crow cawed loudly on top of a tombstone, indicating that they had reached the old graveyard Dunkel hid in the shadows, confused about the reason why the boy had gone to that somber place. Since the view was blocked by the tombstones, the knight thought about getting closer to see what was happening. Suddenly, Dunkel widened his eyes in pure shock upon seeing the scene before his eyes. A strong light shone intensely in the darkness, making the warrior shout for his young master. He found Klein sitting on the ground, carefully arranging the bodies of the 7 fallen cats. Dunkel stammered, not understanding anything, but the boy calmly explained that he would perform a burial ritual for them. Klein pointed out that the animals passed from a contagious disease, fatal to beasts, but harmless to humans. The boy explained that the bodies needed to be buried to prevent the disease from spreading even further. Dunkel tried to stop him, saying that would hurt his hands, but Klein politely turned down the help. The young master seriously commented that, at the end of the day, someone needed to do that job. Back to the present, the commander squeezes his sword hilt and demands to know who he really is. Unshaken, Klein asks to make a question first and inquires him about the first family motto. Dunkel hesitates for a brief moment, but recites the motto that actions define a person and not their origin. The youth agrees and explains that it is because of this motto that a peasant turned captain and that he himself remains alive. He recalls that Dunkel was the one who spent the most time with him since he left the monastery. Leaving the choice in his hands, Klein openly says that if the knight truly believes he is Archimond, he has permission to eliminate him right there. Dunkel hesitates and replies that he hasn't made a decision yet, and much less is totally convinced of that. He firmly declares that the person he serves is the young master Klein, and not a cruel fiend of the continent. Klein mentally thanks for the compliment, and the 2 finally arrive before the dark entrance of the abandoned mine. Dunkel quickly lights a torch, illuminating the somber path that extends into the cavern upon entering. They come across a scary scenario filled with skeletons and skulls scattered across the floor. The commander comments that the odor in the place is extremely strong, and the young master immediately agrees. Several animated targets begin to rise from the cavern's shadows. Proving that those carcasses still move, Klein notices only 7 creatures nearby and begins to channel his blue magic to summon his own servants. He orders his bone warriors to emerge to destroy all the enemies present in those mines. Dunkel stands in shock, witnessing the terrible summon of dark craft right before his eyes. With a simple command from Klein, the powerful bone warriors charge fiercely against the animated targets. Klein summons attack with sharp claws, tearing the opponents apart in a violent combat. The local animated targets try to react, but are completely dominated by the skeleton's speed. Klein's servants dismember the creatures without any pity. Splattering red across the cavern walls, Dunkel observes, astounded the extraordinary strength of those summons, finding all of that unbelievable. The brutal battle continues in the darkness, with Klein's skeletons destroying everything that moves ahead, with the path cleared by his summons. Dunkel guides his young master quickly into the interior of the mine. Dunkel suddenly hears a furious roar coming from the depths of the mine and goes totally on alert. He warns that there must be about 40 enemies by the sound, but Klein just begins to focus his power. The young master initiates a spell to break the bonds of those bodies and free them from the chains. He orders the souls trapped in suffering to free themselves and faithfully obey his direct command. Dunkel watches amazed, while Klein explains that he is just turning the animated targets into allies. The boy calmly comments that that is just a basic tactic in a battle between two dark casters. He concludes by saying that that amount of summoned soldiers should already be enough for the fight. Once more, a fierce cry echoes from the end of the tunnel. Leaving the warriors in combat stance, Klein orders the vanguard to advance and calls Dunkel to accompany him in the attack on the creatures. A horde of animated targets runs frantically in the group's direction through the mine galleries. The first strike hits one of the local monsters, which lets out a groan of pure pain upon being cut. The direct clash begins with extreme violence, and the skeletons begin to shred the horde. Klein commands the rear guard of his bone army to provide support and keep moving forward. The enemies are torn apart in an overwhelming way under the boy's relentless offensive power. The combat proceeds in a fierce manner with the creatures' bodies falling broken to the ground. Even seeing all of that with his own eyes, Dunkel finds it unbelievable that simple skeletons fight like that. He notices startled that those summons act and fight with the flawless coordination of a real army. In a few moments, the entire horde is wiped out, but a heavy thud echoes coming from further ahead. Dunkel is amazed for having beaten such a large army, and Klein warns that now just the two of them will go on. The young master reminds the knight of his promise of trust and notes that they have already gone very deep. Dunkel holds the torch firmly and leads the way through the quiet and dark depths of the cavern. A drop of red liquid falls on the knight's face. Who wonders how much further they will still have to walk around there? Dunkel looks at the red liquid on his hand and suddenly hears a faint whisper begging for an end. He notices it is a human voice and shouts, startled in the darkness, asking if there is anyone alive inside there. The commander promises to save them and asks to reply, while one of the captives just breathes faintly. Upon raising the torch, they see several people tied up and hanging, desperately begging for an end. Dunkel notices, horrified, that those are the missing villagers, kept as tools for dark magic. Suddenly, heavy steps echo in the darkness, and a mysterious voice praises Dunkel's quick deduction. A woman in a dark cloak emerges, explaining that that magic needs many quality bodies to function. She comments with disdain that this is basic for dark casters, and Klein glares at her with a serious and sharp look. The intruder pulls back her cloak's hood, revealing that she never imagined meeting him again in a filthy place like that. She shows herself fully and greets him in an alluring way, saying it had been a long time since the last time she addresses him directly by his old and legendary title of Fiend of the Continent, Lord Archimond. Suddenly, the scene cuts to a little girl's hand happily holding a spectacular stuffed cookie. The voice congratulates the young master on the tough victory, and for having overcome the violent trial by combat. Dunkel asks if they should go straight to the Duke, and Klein decides to change while the little girl hums with the treat. The young master walks thoughtfully and notices something strange in the environment as he looks askance through the hallways. He suspects someone is lurking, without knowing that his blonde cousin, Laya, is hidden behind the wall. Laya questions herself with a racing heart about the reason why she is hiding from her own younger cousin. An old explanation defines the term dark caster as one who deals with carcasses and summons spirits of the fallen. However, the definition changed after that fateful day, becoming a scary symbol of the end. All due to the devastating Archimond incident, which spread an unstoppable army of the fallen across the continent. This terrible war only came to an end when the legendary hero Berkel Rhineland finally defeated Archimond. After that, several fascinated mages tried to study this art, but were limited only to reviving bodies over time. Today's dark casters ended up reduced to inferior mages of simple reanimation. Exactly like the woman before Klein, who introduces herself confidently by the name of Pale. She remains standing on the other side of the massive stone cavern, coldly glaring at the two intruders. Dunkel gets startled by the revelation of his master's name and notices a strange power flow around her. The dark caster begins to emanate a scary and reddish magical power that fills the entire underground gallery. Klein notices right away that Pale enchanted her own cloak with ancient and extremely rare spells. Dunkel draws his sword against the intruder and warns annoyed that that boy is the young master Klein and not the legendary Archimond. The dark caster smiles in a sarcastic way and fakes an apology, saying it was just a silly joke on her part. But she claims to know the truth about the rumors and the boy's dark energy, guaranteeing that he is a dark caster just like her. The woman watches him closely out of the corner of her eye, finding a very specific detail about the boy's combat style quite amusing. She finds it ridiculous and absurd that a true necromancer is wielding a regular sword to fight. Dunkel loses his patience and demands to know at the top of his lungs who ordered her to do that to the innocent villagers. Pale calmly responds that a true master of necromancy should never depend on physical tools to fight. She says their purpose is to command spirits and manipulate forces beyond life itself, while conjuring a dark mist from her mouth. The wicked breath strikes the body of one of the prisoners, causing his eyes to glow an eerie shade of red. The dark energy completely consumes the man, and he draws a final breath amidst the reanimation trance. All the tied-up bodies begin to scream and twist in agony under Pale's powerful dark magic. With a smug smile on her face, she warns that she is going to show the young boy true power. The sorceress concentrates her energy back and initiates the true grim advanced reanimation technique. A monstrous, giant hand violently emerges from the red portal, shattering the surrounding stone walls. She proudly shouts that the colossal creature is the great masterpiece to which she dedicated her entire useful life. The giant monster crashes to the ground with a devastating impact, revealing a creature made of dozens of stitched-up bodies. Faced with such a grim abomination, Dunkel steps back in fear and mutters to himself that this is pure madness. The Imperial commander thinks in terror that he has never seen anything so frightening on any battlefield before. He recognizes the terrible monster as a giant cyclops made entirely of decaying human flesh. Pale gently strokes the face of the colossal beast and apologizes for keeping it locked away for so long. With a cold, deadly gaze, she flatly orders her monster to crush the two intruders to dust. The Cyclops roars with fury and delivers a devastating fist strike against the ground toward the warriors. Dunkel can barely react in time faced with the superhuman, brutal speed of the giant creature. He shouts for his young master and pulls him hard to get him out of the way of the lethal, crushing attack. However, the knight himself ends up being thrown far away due to the force of the wind and the monster's impact. Little Klein lets out a groan of pain as he is grazed by the terrible blow from the flesh beast. Dunkel collides heavily against the stone floor of the mine and tries to recover from the painful impact. Klein tries to stand up amidst the smoke, wiping away the blood trickling from the corners of his mouth. He observes the enemy in absolute silence, maintaining a cold composure even after taking that glancing blow. The giant Cyclops approaches, growling loudly, ready to deliver another lethal strike against the little boy. The imposing monster takes another heavy step, making the ground shake as it closes in on Klein. The beast raises its colossal foot, preparing to crush Klein as if he were nothing but a bug. But suddenly, a deep gash rips through the flesh of the giant Cyclops' heel with immense precision. Dunkel roars furiously as he attacks the monster's leg, shouting for the creature not to dare touch the boy. He delivers an extremely violent slash, severing the giant Cyclops' foot to save Klein's life. Klein watches the knight act with such drive and murmurs his name in a rather intrigued manner. The monster loses its balance due to the cut on its leg and crashes violently onto the cavern floor. While the warrior catches his breath, the ironic sound of slow clapping begins to echo through the darkness. Pale claps sarcastically and praises the precise, spectacular attack delivered by the experienced knight. But she warns that just that level of talent will not be enough. As the severed leg begins to regenerate, Dunkel panics upon seeing that the monster's amputated limb is growing back in a bizarre fashion. The beast recovers completely and then roars furiously in his direction. Dunkel thinks about how the young MC risked himself to save him without using magic and decides he will do everything to protect him too. He charges with fury toward the monster, vowing to strike back against the lethal attack for the sake of his young master. He feels guilty for having suspected that such a kind boy could be the terrible demon from the past. The knight attacks the giant Cyclops with all his might, hacking at the creature's arms to redeem his honor. The monster emits a piercing bellow of rage as its stitched-up flesh limbs are cut once again. Dunkel shouts furiously that he will give his own life if necessary to protect Klein, delivering another blow. However, the severed parts and flesh tentacles begin to crawl back to merge with the body. He curses in anger and frustration as he notices that the colossal creature is already regenerating rapidly again. The monster delivers another brutal attack that cracks the stone ground and kicks up smoke. Dunkel runs nimbly, leaping over the debris to try and find an opening to attack. He jumps incredibly high above the giant abomination, which lets out a confused growl of surprise. The experienced knight decides to attack the monster's head as quickly as possible to put an end to it. Letting out a fierce shout, he brings his sword down with all his strength against the giant Cyclops' skull. The sharp blade cuts deeply into the monster's head, spraying dark blood all over the cavern. However, even with its brain sliced, the creature reacts immediately and catches Dunkel off guard. The Cyclops swats the knight away with a violent slap, forcing him to cough up blood from the strength of the impact. The warrior's body is brutally thrown, crashing against the rocks in an explosion of debris. He collapses unconscious and severely injured, getting stuck in the cracks of the stone wall. The brave commander remains motionless on the ground, unable to get up to continue the fight. Watching it all, Pale is deeply marveled to see the terrifying performance of her flesh creation. She has always had a boundless, unhealthy obsession with research involving reanimation magic. And after years of experiments and cruel sacrifices, she pushed her forbidden knowledge beyond any limit. She managed to create a colossal mutant creature that no other necromancer in the world would be capable of controlling. Because of this, she became absolutely certain that she possessed a divine, incomparable talent. She boasts, saying that not even the legendary demon Archimond would be capable of creating such a perfect Cyclops. In pure delusions of grandeur, she proudly proclaims that she is the greatest necromancer to have ever lived. Convinced that she has surpassed all of Archimond's wisdom, she commands her Cyclops to deal the final blow. The monster prepares to stomp down with full force to crush the helpless body of the unconscious knight. However, Klein begins to walk calmly and explains aloud about the fusion of the Cyclops' cores. Pale glares at him, intrigued, as the boy details with extreme precision the source of the Cyclops' regenerative power. Klein calmly adds that trying to destroy the Cyclops' physical body is just a useless waste of time. With a mocking smile, the boy directly asks the sorceress where the creature's core is located. He knows very well that the vital core of a Cyclops never remains fixed in a single part of the body. Since this single point is its greatest weakness, the core constantly circulates through the monster's veins. Pale laughs scornfully and counters that finding the core in continuous motion is an impossible task to achieve. She proudly insists that this is the masterpiece to which she dedicated her entire life and maximum effort. With her hands enveloped in pink flames, she arrogantly declares that the boy's talent is insignificant. She commands her flesh giant to crush Klein immediately, without giving any chance for defense. Faced with the massive attack, Klein remains calm and begins to remember important details from his past. The boy remembers his past life perfectly, when he faced and slaughtered thousands of identical Cyclopes. He still holds very clearly in his memory the precise sensation of how to detect the weaknesses of these creatures. To him, finding and destroying the core in continuous motion has always been something extremely simple and natural. With a spectacular acrobatic movement, he slices through the air and lands smoothly back on the cavern floor. A gleaming purple beam cuts horizontally across the entire torso of the gigantic flesh beast in the blink of an eye. The Cyclops' vital golden core is struck dead on by the accurate slash. Cracking dramatically, the glowing object completely shatters into several harmless fragments amidst a powerful explosion of light. Pale is left in absolute shock and dread upon seeing her masterpiece destroyed so easily by the boy. With a grim expression, Klein sarcastically suggests that she should try making that just a hobby in her next life. Pale's mind begins to fade slowly as she feels her own life slip away into the deep darkness. Suddenly, the necromancer snaps her eye open in shock as she wakes up and finds herself lying in a mysterious place. She looks around in confusion and notices that her hand is touching completely dark, cold water. Pale stands up slowly, observing the mysterious black blocks that stretch infinitely toward the top. She screams in fear, asking what place this is, but a divine voice announces that she is awakened in the abode of souls. The legendary Lord Archimond reveals himself imposingly in the dark sky and coldly explains that she is in the afterlife. Panicking, the woman refuses to accept that surreal reality and shouts for them to stop talking nonsense. Wielding a massive black battle scythe, the Lord calmly says that she still has not understood her situation there. The demon in bone armor asks with a piercing, calm gaze if they may now begin the proceedings. With a cold, merciless expression, he calmly announces that the time has come for her judgment for her sins. He solemnly declares the beginning of the trial in the name of Archimond, making the surrounding environment tremble. Pale tries to think straight through the panic as she realizes that the young MC just uttered the name of Archimond. She remembers him as the Emperor of Death, who commanded millions of undead in the continent's historical past. The true king of necromancers extends his hand and imposingly orders the sorceress to approach him. Pale's spiritual body begins to levitate on its own and move against her own will through the depths. He accuses her of having kidnapped and tortured innocent citizens, using other people's lives as mere test subjects. Archimond claims to know that she took pleasure in trapping those people in an eternal trance where they could not pass away. The woman panics and refuses to believe it, screaming that Archimond should have been gone a long time ago. Suddenly, she feels a horrible discomfort and notices that her own head is beginning to detach from her body in a bizarre way. Archimond continues speaking from above and coldly accuses her of having used even the souls of the departed as tools. The Lord of Shadows stares at her with a piercing gaze and warns that a fitting punishment will be applied immediately. He declares that, from that moment on, she is the one who will become a mere tool under his control forever. In pure panic, Pale tries to back away and screams desperately, begging him to wait for at least 1 single minute. She rants in horror, unable to accept the idea that she will now be used only as an object of sorcery. The Necromancer falls straight backward, being swallowed by the dark depths of one of the imposing stone coffins. She screams one last time in terror as the heavy stone lid closes relentlessly over her face. Archimond observes the sealed coffin floating in the void and calmly asks if she really fears passing away that much. He cracks a slight smile and tells her to rest easy regarding that fear that afflicts her so much. The Lord delivers a strike with his colossal scythe and warns that she will be reunited with the souls of her former victims very soon. A cry of pure terror and agony echoes through the darkness as her soul is sealed away to pay for all her crimes. Back in the reality of the cavern, someone breathes heavily and begins to realize where they actually are. Pale cries, tears of relief upon opening her eyes, thinking that everything she just witnessed was nothing but a horrible nightmare. At the same time, Dunkel regains consciousness and is highly surprised to realize he is still alive after the blow. However, Pale is left completely in shock upon realizing the terrible reality that only her head has been revived. She lets out a hysterical shriek upon seeing herself in that deplorable state, leaving Dunkel confused and Klein quite pensive. Dunkel tries to understand how he blacked out and what happened there, deducing that the young master defeated the Cyclops entirely on his own. The boy decides it is time to begin the interrogation and calls the knight, who immediately obeys his summons. The severed head keeps screaming without understanding why it is in that state, and Klein calmly asks what she thought of it. He kneels patiently before Pale's head and asks if she is finally managing to regain her lucidity. The young master warns in a cold tone that she should have already realized the severity of the situation she is in. The necromancer stares at him with an expression of pure dread and desperately begs him to wait a moment. Hearing the boy's tone of voice, she immediately recognizes the same terrifying presence that judged her in the afterlife. Pale realizes in horror that Klein is Archimond himself, and he calmly repeats that she would see the souls again. She realizes that the judgment was not a dream, and that all the terrible rumors about the boy were real. The moment she tries to shout Archimond's name, Klein quickly silences her mouth with a quiet gesture. The boy approaches intimidatingly and demands absolute silence so that no one else hears what she has to say. He makes it clear that all he wants from her at that moment is valuable information about what is going on. The boy interrogates Pale's head, asking who sent her to the north, if there are more allies, and what the plans are. He proposes a simple choice, promising a peaceful end if she cooperates, or a terrible eternal existence if she refuses. She cries and asks in fear if eternal life would be in that deplorable state, and Klein confirms without any hesitation. Faced with the terrifying threat of remaining as just a severed head forever, she grinds her teeth in pure despair. The boy stares at her and proposes to see how long she can hold out without crying in the face of eternal torture. Meanwhile, Dunkel pays close attention and notes down every single word spoken by the defeated necromancer in his field log. The knight announces that he has perfectly recorded the entire required statement, and the young master thanks him seriously. The boy decides that the work there is finished and prepares to leave, but Pale's head desperately begs him to wait. She shrieks anxiously, asking what will happen to her from now on, and what they intend to do with her fate. The necromancer begs, reminding him that she cooperated perfectly and revealed all the information the young master requested. Klein cracks a grim smile and ironically agrees that she did indeed fulfill her end of the deal. The boy asks if he ever promised he would let her go if she told the truth, and the sorceress cries, begging for an end. He concentrates his blue energy in his hands and terrifyingly guarantees that he always strictly keeps his promises. Klein extends his glowing hand toward the necromancer's severed head to begin the technique. He ironically asks her to hold on tight through that terrible ordeal for just 1 week. Suddenly, an immense army of frightening roaches begins to emerge and crawl from the cavern floor. The young master coldly explains that the scavenger insects themselves are going to devour her on their own. Pale shrieks in absolute despair upon seeing hundreds of insects rushing toward her defenseless head. She begs with cries of agony as the roaches begin to chew on her living flesh without any mercy. Klein cracks a calm smile and coldly thanks her for the sacrifice she has just provided to him. The boy specifically thanks her for becoming the newest and most useful tool in his grim arsenal. The two turn their backs and leave, while a final muffled scream echoes through the depths of the abandoned mine. Some time later, the story returns to the majestic gates of the Grand Rhineland main estate. Duke Heinkel Rhineland thoughtfully analyzes the detailed mission report that was delivered to his office desk. He reads in disbelief that the Empire released necromancers and that the Church ignored it all, questioning if that is real. The Duke calls his son by name, and little Klein confirms with absolute certainty that things happened exactly that way. The boy reports that there were over 150 bodies in the mine, and that the local nobility ignores the crisis due to politics. The Duke orders Berkman to deploy the knights immediately and dispatch warning messages throughout the entire northern region. Heinkel looks proudly at his youngest son and sincerely praises him for performing such an extraordinary feat. Klein lies, saying he just got lucky, and prefers to keep the use of his necromancy on that mission a secret. He only hopes that Dunkel keeps his word and guards the secret, since that magic is forbidden in the territory. The father leans forward and pulls a special object out of his drawer to hand to the young boy. Heinkel comments that he planned to give him more tests, but realized that is no longer necessary after that mission. The Duke places a brooch with the wolf symbol on the desk, revealing that it is the authentic emblem of the knights. He grants the rank of apprentice knight to his son, apologizing for it being a simple reward for his achievement. Klein pins the gleaming brooch onto his suit and replies with a slight smile that it is already more than enough. The father watches him in silence for a brief moment. With an expression that mixes pride and a hint of melancholy, Heinkel asks him to go get some rest after an exhausting journey, and the young master politely thanks him. The large, luxurious, double wooden doors of the office close gently with a soft click in the hallway. The butler Berkman comments in shock about the scale of the defeated horde and suggests sending an urgent message to his brother. Heinkel knows his brother is very demanding, but sends word that the genius he sought his whole life has finally been found. The Duke refers directly to his own youngest son, proud of the extraordinary prodigy the boy has become. As he walks, the boy amuses himself thinking that he is now officially named a young apprentice knight. He knows that the military area is restricted and that not even Father Garrison will be able to enter there without official permission from the Duke. Klein smiles, thinking that the cleric must be furious wanting to cleanse him, but now he will never have to see him again. He focuses his gaze on his new brooch, remembering his old promise to restore the prestige of the declining family. The young man clenches his fist, focused on his next steps, when he hears rapid footsteps of someone running toward him. Aaron comes running and throws herself against him in a violent embrace, causing the boy to let out a gasp of pure surprise. The master complains of back pain from the impact and asks if the mischievous little maid ran out of cookies. Erin crosses her arms, pouting and pretending she doesn't care about sweets, but Klein points out the obvious crumbs around her mouth. The boy tells her to go to the kitchen to ask for more treats, and the little maid joyfully agrees with his idea. Suddenly, Klein freezes completely upon hearing from Erin that the terrifying Father Garrison is at the mansion at this very moment. A frightening memory of the giant, furious cleric flashes through Klein's mind in an extremely tense manner. Filled with apprehension, the boy hears the cleric's deep voice right behind him, asking how his mission journey went. Klein turns his face, breaking into a cold sweat, as he notices that the terrible priest was already standing there patiently waiting for his return. Garrison smiles coldly and greets him by calling his full name, maintaining an intimidating gaze upon him. Meanwhile, outside the mansion, several servants run around screaming desperately for their young master's name. The army of employees searches the entire surrounding forest, pleading for the little Rhineland to show up soon. They talk worriedly about not finding any trace or sign of the boy in any direction of the search. Hidden on a tree branch high above them, Klein hears that Father Garrison is extremely angry about his disappearance. The servant shouts that the priest promised to forgive him immediately if he decides to show up and stop hiding there. The boy thinks irritably that the cleric lied last time and ended up leaving him tied upside down as a punishment. Klein watches the servants leave and mutters a quiet curse, wishing they would all just vanish from his sight. Klein is sleeping peacefully on a tree branch in the middle of the night. Suddenly, the boy wakes up startled by a nightmare and shouts for Garrison to stop. He looks at the crescent moon in the sky and wonders if he actually ended up falling asleep. Klein decides to climb down from the tree, thinking that the servants must have already given up looking for him. Suddenly, he sees something terrifying on the ground and is left completely speechless as he realizes the danger. The boy panics as he realizes he has come face to face with terrible northern grizzly bears. This type of bear is known for being a massive, violent predator that inhabits the northern region. They possess a vicious temperament and sharp claws, perfect for tearing the flesh of their prey apart. Klein knows that without his necromancy, he would be nothing but bear food, so he decides to wait it out in hiding. While he waits, the boy shivers from the cold and complains about the terrible freezing weather of that region. He remembers when he dedicated everything he had to the northerners who met an unjust end. Despite this, he ended up being reborn precisely into the family of the very man who took his life. Klein laments that even in his new life, he just keeps running away all the time. He lets out a tired sigh and curls up on the tree to try and protect himself from the intense cold. In his mind, voices from the past echo furiously, demanding that they capture and eliminate the terrible Archimond. The boy remembers the whispers of people saying he was a cursed child. Klein keeps shivering heavily and murmurs softly about how unbearable the cold is. Right then, a shadow emerges and Garrison's voice asks if the young master has finally awakened. The boy asks if he froze to death, but the cleric laughs and warns that he only rescued him from the tree. Klein finds the absence of the bears strange, but the priest guarantees that he already took care of all of them without any trouble. The boy asks to be let down, but the cleric insists on carrying him because he is burning up with a fever. Klein gets confused and asks why the priest saved him instead of letting him freeze to death or become bear food. He questions if the cleric wasn't the person who wanted him gone the most, leaving the man in silence. Looking up at the starry sky, Garrison says that the stars do not create their own darkness. He goes on to say that they merely shine exactly where they are supposed to be in the sky. The cleric explains that the same applies to young lives, which do not yet know what is right or wrong. Garrison thinks about how the future of a young living being is something full of possibilities. The cleric adds by saying he does not have the right to destroy that immense potential within the boy. Klein finds it contradictory to hear this, from someone who usually puts him through grueling training, but the priest continues his reasoning. Garrison warns that if this being chooses to become the darkness itself, or if he is the real Archimond he seeks, the cleric coldly tells the boy to be very careful. From then on, returning to the present, the cleric terrifyingly warns Klein that he will eliminate him with his own hands. With an enigmatic smile, Garrison greets Klein, saying it has been quite a while, sweating from nervousness. The young master agrees and replies that it really has been a long time. The cleric explains that he needed to go to the Holy Order to resolve some very urgent matters. He reveals that he received a vial containing a very interesting item from an old friend over there. Klein recognizes the ectoplasm immediately and fears that his demonic energy has been discovered right there. Garrison comments that a necromancer appeared out of nowhere when the boy was attacked in the forest. The cleric explains that he took care of ending that wretched invader personally. However, he reveals that the vial showed there was more than just one trace of a necromancer at the scene. With a calm and frightening voice, Garrison states that the object detected the presence of two of them. Klein's heart begins to beat very fast due to the despair and extreme tension. The boy remembers all the incredibly strong beasts and people he has already faced in the past. Even so, Archimond's intuition triggers a maximum danger warning upon facing the terrible cleric. Klein realizes it is impossible to defeat him right now and that his ability to copy techniques would not work. Knowing he would perish in an instant, the boy freezes when the priest commands him to use his necromancy. Seeing the boy's shock, Garrison says he is giving him a chance because of the past they share. He explains that if it is just a common spell to move corpses, he will merely report the case to the order. But the cleric warns that if it is the formula that controls souls from that person of the past, he will perish. At that moment, Klein remembers the infuriating voices of the past, shouting for the scum. Archimond to perish. Klein smiles with bitterness and thinks about how that individual used to subject him to water training every day, pretending it was a purification ritual. He finds it amusing and says that a man he knew in the past used to say something very similar to Garrison's words. The boy remembers that man's words about the future of children, something he did not quite understand back then. But Klein reveals that upon hearing the priest speak of it, he managed to understand for a moment what kind of justice Garrison believed in. The boy adds that he knows the cleric did not do those things out of pure hatred against him, leaving Garrison completely surprised. He thinks about his past, accepting that he lost that battle, and that is why he ended up passing away. However, things are completely different now in his new chance at life. Klein clenches his fist tightly and rejects the priest's order to use necromancy there, telling him to stop talking nonsense. The boy firmly asserts that he himself will decide his own destiny, as he no longer intends to run away from anything. Faced with the boy's stubborn refusal, Garrison sighs with his back turned and says that unfortunately, he has no other choice. The cleric warns that he will have to use physical force to compel the young master to use his necromancy powers. Klein senses the terrible danger instantly upon seeing Garrison charging at him with full force. In total panic, the boy desperately thinks that he needs to dodge that devastating blow no matter what. He focuses his entire attention on trying to escape the cleric's colossal punch at least one single time. With a swift movement, Klein attempts to evade the overwhelming attack closing in on him. He knows he only needs to manage to dodge that fist once for his plan to succeed. In the middle of the dodge, the boy manages to make the cork of a vial pop out with a quick snap. Garrison notices Klein's quick play and realizes that the young master has managed to achieve his goal. Even while falling to the ground, the young master flashes a victorious smile, knowing that it is finally all over. The vial containing the red ectoplasm crashes to the ground and shatters completely, spilling all the liquid. The sound of the destruction catches the attention of nearby servants, who let out a startled cry of panic at the scene. They are left shocked, not understanding what is happening, and wonder if the priest actually attacked the young master. Klein sees the servants arriving and thinks that opening is the perfect chance to carry out his attack. But suddenly, Garrison appears holding a sword and asks if the boy was looking for that. Klein is completely incredulous, as he notices that his own sword vanished from his sheath without him even realizing. The cleric holds the weapon with ease, showing that he is far faster and more skilled than the young master. With disdain, Garrison tosses the sword to the ground far away from them, leaving the boy even more tense given the situation. Klein's thoughts are frustrated, thinking that a necromancer using a sword is an unusual sight, realizing just how dangerous that man is. He realizes that the cleric truly plans to end him right there, while the man coldly warns that he does not need a weapon. Garrison raises his massive fist and prepares to deliver another direct strike against the defenseless boy. A loud crash echoes through the hall as the colossal attack is delivered with devastating force. The impact is so strong that it destroys part of the surrounding structure, scattering dust and pieces of debris everywhere. Nearby servants and soldiers fall to the ground or cover themselves to protect against the violent shockwave. Amidst the curtain of smoke spreading through the place, someone begins to cough heavily due to the dust. In the middle of the mist, Garrison's voice echoes, desperately ordering them to call the guards as quickly as possible. The cleric stares at the imposing figure that appeared in front of him and mutters in surprise upon recognizing who it is. Heinkel appears wielding a gleaming sword and coldly demands an explanation for what the priest just did. The imposing 7th Duke of the Rhineland family warns that the priest had better speak up quickly before his sword cuts him in half. Garrison grows tense before the powerful Duke, who repeats the terrible threat with an extremely serious gaze. Watching the scene from afar, Klein breathes a sigh of relief and thinks to himself that he already knew this would happen. He smirks slightly as he realizes that absolutely everything is going exactly as he planned. Suddenly, the guard knights receive orders to take up their combat positions in the hall. They charge toward the conflict, shouting to protect Duke Heinkel and the young master from any threat. Commander Dunkel arrives at the scene and is completely shocked to see the scale of the destruction in the room. Klein knew that knights can easily sense intent to harm, and that he just needed to stall for a bit to make his father come running. The boy was fully aware that he could not win on his own against the fearsome Garrison, the exarch of the Holy Order, in front of all the knights. Heinkel asks once again if Garrison was truly attempting to attack young Klein. Garrison responds seriously that the young master used necromancy, reminding the Duke of the weight that carries. Heinkel fires back, saying that outside of the Holy Kingdom, there is no law on the continent that forbids the use of necromancy. Garrison retorts firmly, asserting that the Duke should know better than anyone what that magic means for the boy. Heinkel says in anger that his son suffered for 7 years because of a foolish rumor, and that he will not allow that to happen again since he is the boy's father. He glares at the cleric with seriousness, and warns the exarch that he will never allow him to lay a hand on his son ever again. The Duke commands the priest to back down with his hostile intent, unless he wants to become the enemy of the entire Rhineland family, but Garrison only laughs. Suddenly, Garrison begins to laugh hysterically and uncontrollably, leaving both Heinkel and Klein surprised. The priest begins to recite verses of his religious belief, swearing before God not to trust his heart to the lies of an unbeliever. He displays a bizarre and frightening expression as he declares with all his devotion that he will show no mercy to heretics. Garrison activates a powerful golden energy around himself and charges forward, determined to fight. While Heinkel prepares to block the attack, The cleric concentrates all his absurd strength into his fists, emanating intense heat from his giant body. The knights shout in worry, warning that the situation is extremely dangerous, and ask everyone not to approach recklessly. Heinkel himself senses the gravity of the situation and recognizes that they are facing real danger at that moment. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet begins to shatter under the tremendous spiritual pressure dominating the room. Someone shouts in despair, warning everyone to watch out, as the mansion is about to collapse due to the force of the attacks. Garrison continues to gather his incredible radiant energy, preparing a definitive strike with clenched fists. Heinkel gives one last stern warning to the Exarch, threateningly ordering him to lower his fists once and for all without backing down. Garrison responds that this clash represents the divine judgment itself against the Rhineland family. A violent clash of forces occurs in the middle of the hall, creating a massive explosion that shakes the structures of the place. The Duke attacks with relentless precision, focusing all his strength into the blade of his powerful sword. The two exchange fierce, high-level blows, illuminating the entire hall with brilliant beams of red and golden energy. Garrison manages to break away from a dangerous slashing attack by quickly leaping into the air with agility unusual for his size. The stray impact of their techniques tears open massive craters and destroys the stone pillars around them. The soldiers fall to the ground, coughing heavily amidst the dense curtain of smoke that blocks the view of the battle. The priest gathers all his power and delivers his terrible, special move known as the Strike of Condemnation. To counter the attack, Heinkel utilizes his family's secret technique, unleashing the second form of the meteor sword. An immense spark glints in the warrior's eyes as the colossal energies are about to collide once again. The terrible clash of the two secret techniques generates a blinding explosion that consumes the entire field of vision. The nearby men groan in pain, trying to shield themselves from the violent impact sweeping through the entire environment. Klein grows very tense as he realizes the situation is spinning completely out of control and getting far too complicated. Suddenly, the little maid Aaron comes running into the destroyed hall and screams, begging them to stop that at once. She courageously places herself right in the path of Heinkel and the priest, desperately imploring them to stop fighting. Heinkel, Garrison, and Klein are left completely shocked and speechless upon seeing the girl meddle in such a deadly battle. Dunkel is paralyzed with surprise, unable to believe what the girl just did right in front of them. The commander shouts in fear for Aaron's name and orders her to get out of there immediately since it is an extremely dangerous place. He wonders why she is there. While the little maid continues taking firm steps toward the terrible priest, Garrison is surprised to see Aaron's tiny hand reaching out amiably toward him as she calls him by name. With a cute smile, the girl reminds the priest that he had promised to bring her a gift when he returned from his trip. The total break in tension leaves absolutely every warrior and guard in the place completely confused and bewildered. Garrison stammers in surprise, asking about this gift, and Aaron joyfully confirms that he definitely promised to buy her one. She begins to skip around, chanting that liars will be punished by the heavens, making Klein wonder if ignoring a tense atmosphere like that is a gift of hers. The cleric finally remembers and agrees, awkwardly confessing that he really had made that promise before departing. He pulls a package out of his pocket and explains that they are cookies from a famous pastry shop, leaving the little maid quite enthusiastic. Without wasting any time, Aaron takes one of the treats and begins to eat happily with her cheeks full. With her eyes sparkling with happiness, she says that the cookies he brought are truly delicious. The little girl asks Garrison what happened to his sweets, while the priest begins to remember when he was young. He recalls that he grew up in a wretched place where it was difficult to get food or water, and most of his friends passed away before growing up. Garrison dramatically reveals that the name of that terrible den of his childhood was the cult of Archimond. The boy gets confused upon hearing that name and wonders if he created that, but realizes he has no memory of it from his past life. The cleric explains that he vowed to destroy that cursed name that ruined his life and took his friends, even if he has to perish for it, with a softer tone of voice. Garrison looks at Aaron and makes one last very sincere request to her. He affectionately asks her to eat his share too and enjoy the sweets, as that is the only thing he can do for her. Finally, he directs his serious gaze toward Klein, warning him in an enigmatic manner that things will be different at their next meeting. Garrison leaves thoughtfully and tells himself that this matter with the Rhineland family is certainly not going to end this way. The young master kneels exhaustedly on the ground, letting out a deep sigh of relief for managing to survive that tense encounter. He thinks to himself that making an enemy out of Garrison is something he could never face again. He knows that the priest's warning means there will be a next deadly clash, like a true game of cat and mouse until one of them gives up air and suddenly appears, offering a piece of cookie to Klein, giving a massive scare to the boy who was distracted. The young master asks if she likes strawberry cake and tells her to go to the head chef to order a massive cake in his name. Klein says she can eat it all by herself, and the little maid dashes off, running and shouting from pure happiness. Seeing her run away so happily, the boy thinks that the life or death struggle from earlier almost seemed like foolishness, until his father calls his name. The young master returns to his serious posture upon remembering that he still needs to deal with the next major obstacle of his journey. Heinkel looks at his son and says firmly that the two of them need to have a very serious conversation completely in private. The two gather in a quiet meeting room, elegantly lit by a large candle chandelier on the ceiling. The Duke directly asks if his son learned the ways of necromancy, and Klein immediately admits that he did. Heinkel turns around in disbelief and questions why he, of all people, who lived in chains for 7 years because of this, would mess with this forbidden magic. The Duke continues demanding answers on how on earth the boy managed to gain access to this type of dangerous knowledge. Klein makes up an excuse and calmly replies that he acquired that knowledge by reading the old archives from his late mother's annex. Heinkel is shocked to hear mention of Claire's annex. Unaware that it is actually just a very well-told lie, the boy thinks that this was the most plausible lie and says he does not intend to make excuses for hiding it, but that necromancy was his only way out. Heinkel argues by saying there must have been another way to defend himself, suggesting swordsmanship, but his son replies no. He reminds his father about the recent report Dunkel sent, proving that he is someone completely devoid of mana. The boy explains that if he depended only on simple swordsmanship, he would never be able to defeat those terrible monsters and overcome the dangers. He warns that the Empire is using necromancers to attack the North, and asks his father to recognize his strength with the intent of restoring the family's power. With total audacity, the boy proposes that they use him as the Rhineland family's very own necromancer, leaving the final decision in his father's hands. He throws down the challenge, saying that this depends on whether his father truly believes he is not the feared reincarnation of the legendary Archimonde. Heinkel remains in absolute silence upon hearing the harsh choice between using his power to save the lineage or watching the family fall to ruin. Heinkel begins to speak about the exact moment the boy returned for the first time to the Grand Ducal estate after years away. He recalls that, even after the boy had spent 7 difficult years locked up in a terrible reformatory under severe conditions, his son simply called him father in a very natural way and without showing even a single drop of resentment regarding everything he went through. In that memory, little Klein looked at him with affection and sweetly said that he was finally back to his true home. The father blames himself, saying he was foolish for not taking responsibility for his future, leaving Klein surprised to notice that the man kept that in his heart. The Duke accepts that the boy must have just been happy to be freed from confinement and guarantees that he has no right or reason to stop him now. Klein is left speechless upon hearing his name uttered with so much affection by that man who seemed so distant. With a tender smile, the father says that the boy can act exactly as he wishes from then on in another very dark place. A mysterious and grim man says it is time to meet with Klein, ordering them to bring him to him. He calls for Laya, revealing that the beautiful blonde-haired warrior is involved in that mysterious plan in the shadows. With a serious and obedient gaze, the reliable commander confirms the order given by the mysterious man and says she understood everything. The identity of the mysterious shadow man is revealed to be the influential Grand Duke Helion of that region. In a tavern in the darkness of the night in the neighboring town, a furious shout of hatred breaks all the silence of the street. One of the mercenaries screams in absolute despair as he is brutally thrown out of the building with extreme violence. From the middle of the smoke emerges a gigantic and frightening silhouette with glowing red eyes and a malevolent aura. One of the mercenaries fallen on the ground laments in great pain, unable to believe that his entire group was defeated so easily by that. He looks with absolute terror at the creature, realizing desperately that they are not dealing with a human, but with a true monster. Another warrior tries to maintain his stance and wields his sword, shouting angrily that he no longer cares about the consequences. He focuses all his strength into a single desperate strike and charges head-on against the Colossus, shouting for it to perish. Without any difficulty, the colossal creature strikes the mercenary's face with its giant fist and crushes the man. The monster continues the massacre, launching another brutal strike that throws another defenseless warrior far away. The surviving soldiers enter total panic and run away desperately to try and save their own lives. The fearsome invader squeezes a glowing blue magic stone very tightly in its monstrous hands. It advances in the blink of an eye and lands another relentless attack that hurls another helpless victim through the air, with a bizarre and grim smile stamped on its face. The creature frighteningly warns that it is highly enjoying that massacre. A young female warrior fallen on the ground is completely terrified upon seeing the monster's massive shadow slowly approach her. The little boy cries while hugging his older sister, saying he is very scared and does not want to perish there. The girl begs for help as the massive monster raises a colossal boulder high above them to crush them. In an extremely sadistic manner, the monster tells the little children not to cry. It hurls the massive stone at them, cruelly asserting that everything will be over very quickly. Suddenly, Commander Laya appears, leaping from high above and wielding her spear with extreme determination. She destroys the massive boulder thrown by the monster with a single accurate strike of her gleaming spear. With great agility, the warrior lands gracefully on the ground, placing herself as a shield between the creature and the children. Without breaking her gaze from the danger, she orders the children to run away from there since it is a dangerous place. The little ones agree in fear and run away in search of safety. While Laya prepares for combat, the monster delivers an overwhelming punch, but the commander manages to dodge with precision at the last second. The creature's fist strikes the ground with extreme violence, creating a massive explosion that makes Laya leap backward. In the middle of the leap, she maintains total focus on her opponent, preparing her next counterattack move. Her eyes glow with an intense color as she concentrates her magic strength to deliver a powerful blow. She spins in the air and charges at the monster with a spear attack enveloped in a brilliant bluish energy. The Colossus blocks the lethal attack by catching the sharp tip of the spear directly with its hands, flashing a sadistic smile. The monster stares at the warrior with its frightening red eye and begins to speak in a hoarse, imposing voice. It delivers a monstrous punch toward her, proudly proclaiming that it is the strongest being there. Laya manages to defend herself at the last instant, utilizing the sturdy shaft of her spear to block the impact. With a swift and skillful spin of her weapon, the commander forces the Colossus to back up a few steps. She prepares to attack again, focusing all her strength into the tip of her powerful blue spear. The commander delivers an overwhelming vertical strike that hits the monster dead on with destructive energy. The Colossus lets out a groan of pain upon being struck by the immense shockwave that cracks the ground around it. It spits blood, but merely smiles with derision and mocks, saying that strong blow only stung a little. But suddenly, a giant, gleaming sword descends from the heavens like a meteor toward the creature. The monster's eyes widen in complete panic as it notices the immense power of that divine weapon falling upon it. The colossal sword strikes the ground with indescribable violence, generating a massive explosion of blue magic energy. The creature coughs up a lot of blood from its mouth upon suffering extremely severe damage from that overwhelming impact. The Colossus ends up completely defeated, falling surrounded by debris in the middle of that newly formed crater. The soldiers come running to the scene and call for Commander Laya, relieved to see that she managed to win the combat. One of the officers comments worriedly that this is already the third time this month that a case of sudden rage and monstrous strength has occurred. He adds that there are reports from witnesses claiming to have seen those same strange and frightening purple veins on the bodies of the invaders. Still, alive beneath the blade, the monster laughs mockingly and whispers that anyone can get strong if they possess that. It states in a delusional manner that with that, it would become even more powerful than the legendary Archimonde from 200 years ago. Having no patience for the creature's madness, Laya brands her spear and finishes off the invader to silence him once and for all. She turns around, coldly saying that no one can become Archimonde and that he is not even worthy of uttering that name. With great determination in her gaze, the commander warns that she herself will investigate and discover the truth about that. A while later, back at the Rhineland dukedom, one of the servants sighs while sweeping the dust and debris from the floor. They look shocked at the walls of the mansion, commenting on how much the structures are still destroyed after the great fight. One of them thinks they were lucky considering the violence of the combat, but the other angrily retorts, saying there is no luck in that at all. He explains that if Duke Heinkel had not been present, the entire estate would have been blown to pieces, telling the others to be careful with the stones. While Aaron walks carrying several heavy books in the background, one servant asks if it is true that she meddled in the combat, and the other doubts it. They continue talking, asserting that such a tiny and fragile little girl would never have the strength to do something like that. They conclude that it must have all been just a figment of someone's imagination. While the little maid passes by, humming cutely, Aaron joyfully enters the young master's office, calling for Klein in a very sweet and casual way. She approaches with the stack of books and announces all happily that she brought exactly what he had asked to read. The boy, wearing an elegant reading monocle, raises his eyes and lets out a confused murmur upon seeing the stack of books. Aaron praises her master's good looks and warns that if he gets too handsome, women will play with him, leaving the boy intrigued about where she learned that. She confesses that she overheard the other maids talking about a romance drama, making Klein sigh and promise to read children's books to her from then on. However, he ponders that he will be very busy in the coming weeks, remembering that it has already been 7 days since the violent clash between his father and Garrison. The boy recalls that in that brief moment of overwhelming physical conflict, several important parts of the ducal mansion ended up destroyed. Klein remembers that the repairs on the mansion have been going on for days, and recognizes that he himself would have perished if Aaron had not intervened. But in any case, he managed to get something good out of this whole situation when Dunkel enters the office. Calling his name, Dunkel announces that the books on medicine and anatomical theory have arrived, causing Aaron to complain that she wanted her children's storybook. The boy reflects on how in the past, when he was still Archimond, he worked like a slave in the magic tower just to learn a single technique. He remembers that he had to concoct wild plans just to manage to steal a torn page from a spellbook. Archimond was almost caught stealing once and nearly lost his fingers as a punishment from the relentless guards. In the old days, only nobles or wizard families had access to academic knowledge, but now his situation is very different. He opens one of the new medicine books with enthusiasm, flipping through the pages with determination. Now he has access to any knowledge he wants, realizing upon reading that an old hypothesis about mana flow and blood vessels was wrong. The boy gets extremely excited to see the new mana theories discovered in the 200 years after his death, feeling a great rush of enthusiasm. With a determined and somewhat frightening gaze, the young master decides to devour and memorize every single piece of that new information. He stops reading for a moment and lets out a confused sound upon noticing the presence of another person approaching him in the room. He remembers the name of Rudel Rhineland, while Dunkel continues speaking to him with a somewhat serious look. The knight asks why the boy is gathering so many anatomy books and questions the meaning of that mysterious paper on his desk. Klein lifts the sheet and calmly explains that it is an old formula used for constructing a spiritual body. Dunkel and Aaron are confused by the difficult names, while Klein asks if they still remember the skeleton he summoned before the boy demonstrates the process by throwing a handful of human ashes directly onto the magic circle drawn on the paper. Then, he begins to channel his bluish demonic energy through his fingers toward the drawing. Aaron's eyes widen, sparkling with curiosity, and she lets out a sound of awe upon seeing the beginning of the magic trick. He explains that his necromancy is special because he first makes a contract with a soul using demonic energy and then uses its mana to create the body. While Aaron applauds enchanted, Klein explains that most common souls cannot manifest anything beyond a simple skeleton. This occurs because they do not have enough mana or a sense of individuality, maintaining a very simple and fragile combat structure. The boy recalls that they function well as an obedient military unit, perfectly following the delegated attack and defense tactics. However, against powerful knights who use mana, there is no guarantee of victory, remembering that he himself had to defeat Dalton with his own hands. Dunkel wonders what would happen if the soul used were not common, and Klein raises a new and interesting hypothesis to debate. He questions what the result would be if this soul belonged to a legendary knight who possessed an immense amount of mana in the past. Dunkel turns pale with worry and asks in fear if the young master is truly thinking of doing something that crazy Klein tells him not to worry, as he does not plan to do that right now, explaining that strong souls like that are extremely rare to find. He accepts that he does not need that now, when suddenly knocks on the door interrupt the conversation, and the butler calls his name. Berkman enters the room holding an elegant envelope and announces that an important invitation letter has just arrived from Polwyvern. He explains that the invitation concerns a very urgent matter coming from Polwyvern, making Klein remember that that is the family of his cousin Laya. Klein suddenly remembers a promise about winning a duel and receiving something valuable that was told to him some time ago. While the boy tries to search his memory, Dunkel finds it strange that such an urgent matter was sent directly to Klein. Instead of his father, Berkman reveals in an enigmatic manner that the letter was sent personally by the lady of the Helion family herself. Dunkel questions indignantly about that woman, who moved to a collateral branch after marriage, summoning the young master there. The butler agrees, but reminds him that she is Duke Heinkel's older sister and the current lady of Polwyvern, making the invitation impossible to refuse. Klein makes a sudden decision and interrupts the discussion, firmly announcing that he will accept the invitation and go there. He looks at the formula on the desk and thinks that this trip actually happened to be even better for his personal plans. The boy flashes a shrewd and wicked smile upon realizing that now he finally has an excellent reason to act. Later that night, Klein walks silently down the hallway while Aaron sleeps deeply in her bed, very peaceful. He passes by the maid who mumbles in her sleep about cookies, while he makes his way holding a lamp to light his steps. He thinks about the legendary Rudel Rhineland, the renowned 6th Duke of the entire powerful Rhineland family dynasty. The man was Heinkel's father and considered the strongest knight on the continent, spending his entire life fighting until he passed away young as a tragic hero. Klein knows he needs to obtain his soul at all costs, stopping in front of a massive underground structure and wondering if it is there. He descends the dark stairs of the crypt holding his lamp, entering the immense ancestral tomb of the family. The underground hall is gigantic and gloomy, housing the ancient stone tombs of several heroes of the past. The boy observes the coffins and realizes in frustration that most of those souls have already departed to the beyond, leaving no traces. However, he activates his blue magic energy and notices that a single spiritual presence still remains in that dark place. Rudel's coffin glows intensely with a bluish flame, showing that his soul still wanders there, full of regrets. Klein smiles and thinks to himself that he cannot even imagine what his father Heinkel would say if he found out what he is about to do. He leans on the edge of the stone coffin and stares intently at the sleeping soul of the legendary 6th Duke. The boy smiles slightly, with a cold sweat on his face, wondering if it is finally time to begin the ritual. He prepares his bluish magic to rob his ancestor's tomb, apologizing to his grandfather for being a rebellious grandson upon their first meeting. Klein recites the necromancy spell aloud, promising to light the path of that soul trapped in the past in the name of the guide. The boy continues the solemn invocation, ordering the soul to accept the spiritual contract if it wishes to follow the indicated path. An immense column of blue spiritual fire consumes the entire ancestral stone coffin, illuminating the dark crypt. Suddenly, the imposing voice of the ancient warrior resounds in the place, calling for the presence of the necromancer himself. The boy realizes that the ancient duke's strength was no exaggeration. As the soul absorbed absolutely all the energy he offered, Klein recalls that the pinnacle of evolution for this soul would be to transform it into a fearsome death knight. This high-level creature is made by anchoring a warrior's soul to a spiritual body, but to seal the contract there are two ways. The first is to subjugate the spirit by force, and the second is to gain its consent. While Rudel's soul questions why it was invoked, the ancient duke notices something bizarre and exclaims in surprise, noting that the absolute worst sworn enemy of the Rhineland family is right there. He realizes that the soul of the legendary Archimond ended up possessing the physical body of a young descendant of his own bloodline. Klein knows that souls see the essence and not the form, so he proposes that the spirit accept the terms of the contract he has already sent. The spirit admits that the proposal is admirable, but questions how he, a former duke, could easily trust the worst enemy of his people. The mental invocation environment expands into a bluish battlefield filled with sharp crystals of ice and energy. Rudel delivers an overwhelming sword strike that is blocked up close by Klein, who maintains a determined and confident smile. The young master promises to prove there are no lies in his contract proposal, vowing that he will free the ancient duke from all his burdens. The spirit scoffs, saying that a knight's trust comes from the sword, mockingly reminding him that he just violated his own grandfather's coffin. With that, the terrible mental combat of soul subjugation finally begins under the light of the afterlife's moon. Klein recalls that the Empire, the greatest power on the continent founded by Emperor Meldir, has always had the ambition to rule the entire world. However, the three great independent duchies have always resisted imperial dominance, forcing the Empire to prepare an alternative plan in secret. This plan involves his aunt Helion, who is Heinkel's sister, Laya's stepmother, and the influential leader of all the family's collateral branches. He finds it highly suspicious that a powerful and ambitious person like her would decide to summon him so suddenly and mysteriously. Returning to the present, Dunkel informs the young master that he has finished organizing all the new medicine books brought over. Klein drinks his tea peacefully and asks the knight to prepare all the luggage. As he intends to depart for Polwyvern in 3 days, Dunkel looks at the invitation with concern, warning that he will not be able to accompany him and asking if the boy will be okay alone. The boy admits that a mistake there could cost him his life, but explains that he needs to go anyway to manage to gather valuable information. He wants to find out exactly what his Aunt Helion is planning and how the power struggles between the family's collateral branches work. Klein plans to turn some of her henchmen into the undead if necessary, but Dunkel immediately interrupts him and forbids him from doing so. The faithful knight warns in a stern manner that if the boy does something that wicked, he will be no different from the enemies he fights. He speaks in the name of the knight's honor, but the boy retorts from the side, asking what the problem is with doing bad things to bad people. Klein recalls that the collateral branches live in luxury by extorting the main family, and questions if Dunkel still wants to insist on this chivalry talk. Even so, Dunkel proudly asserts that the House of Rhineland must never abandon its ethical values and live solely for personal gains. The young master questions if concepts like honor and loyalty are truly that important, and the knight firmly responds yes. He adds in an imposing manner, saying that these values of honor and loyalty are worth more than anything else in the entire world. Klein smiles with his fist clenched and replies that he is very happy to hear that, as he himself has a different path to walk. Back to the mental combat in the crypt, he proclaims that he is actually nothing but a terrible and wicked necromancer. Rudel's spirit charges fiercely, concentrating his destructive blue flame in his hands to strike his grandson. The boy coldly analyzes the approaching attack, noticing immediately that the opponent's first move will be a thrust. He prepares to parry the frontal blow, already predicting and perfectly anticipating what the adversary's next move will be. The two swords collide with extreme force in the air, creating beautiful glowing trails of blue and pink energy across the battlefield. The ancient duke smiles mockingly as he quickly parries away and praises the boy, saying he is not bad at all in combat. Rudel is highly impressed to notice that a necromancer of his bloodline can wield a sword with such mastery and speed. Klein recalls that he closely watched Deline's training and the previous violent combat between Heinkel and Father Garrison. He explains that he completely analyzed and memorized all the principles and advanced fighting techniques used by them in his mind. The boy realizes that now all that's left is to put all this vast learning into practice in real combat to master the techniques. But the ancient duke flashes a shrewd smirk and confidently asserts that all of that is completely useless against him. The warrior warns that Klein is full of openings before his experienced eyes and delivers a blow impossible to dodge. A colossal explosion of spiritual energy consumes the entire mental battlefield. Ending that confrontation in a devastating manner, Rudel is amused by the boy's advance and lets out a whisper of curiosity upon seeing his stance. The ancient duke notices that the young master is moving in a manner identical to that era of the past. Klein attempts to quickly position himself behind Rudel to surprise him and subjugate him all at once. However, the experienced spirit mockingly warns him not to go so fast with his attack. The two collide their swords in the air with great force, creating a brilliant beam under the moonlight. The young master lands nimbly on the ground, backing up a few yards with his blade drawn. Rudel admits in a serious manner that he is genuinely surprised by the boy's performance in that battle. He highlights how impressive it is for his grandson to manage to parry all his attacks with a body devoid of mana. The spirit recognizes that the boy possesses an extremely useful talent. Leaving Klein in silence, Klein remembers that Rudel was the 6th duke of his house, and the man who once held the title of the strongest knight in the world. What truly elevated that warrior's prestige was his totally unique and fearsome swordsmanship style. The spirit asks mockingly if the boy likes pretending to be Heinkel's son, but Klein finds his grandfather's vulgar language strange. Klein agrees in a complicit manner, commenting from the side that his father truly doesn't have the slightest clue about the truth. Rudel lets out a genuine laugh and jokes that, for the offense to the family, the boy truly must be of his own blood. Next, the ancient duke suddenly changes his stance and decides to cast small talk aside for a moment. He seriously warns that he is going to fight with maximum force and utilize all his skills from then on. Klein is in absolute shock as he notices that his grandfather is going to utilize that legendary super complex swordsmanship style that he himself created. This secret technique causes the blade's trajectory to disperse into several paths, making it impossible to guess which attack is real. The warrior unleashes the fearsome phantom sword technique, launching a relentless rain of bluish blades in Klein's direction. The young master steadies his stance and focuses to the utmost, knowing that only one of those approaching cutting beams is real. He knows he must not look at the fake blades, but rather predict and perfectly block the direction of the true strike. He predicts that the first attack will be a horizontal slash from the right and manages to dodge the advance with precision. The boy remains focused, already calculating that his grandfather's next move will be a horizontal strike coming from the left side. However, Klein's eyes widen in complete shock as he realizes he ended up making a crucial miscalculation right then. He realizes he was wrong when an overwhelming blow descends from above, forcing him to desperately dodge at the last split second. The ancient duke stomps heavily on the ground, generating a massive shockwave that shakes the entire surrounding area. He delivers rapid slashes from several different angles, forcing the young master to jump backward to stay alive. The boy realizes that the previous blow was just a feint, and that now he needs to anticipate the opponent's most unpredictable combos. He reacts quickly upon sensing that the spirit's next attack will come directly from his back in a treacherous manner. With absurd reflexes, Klein spins his body and manages to block Rudel's powerful sword strike just in time, without giving any respite. The ancient warrior clenches his fist and channels his energy to land a direct punch on his grandson. The boy is caught off guard by the swift movement and ends up being struck and thrown far away with extreme force. The impact is so devastating that it tears open a trail of blue light as the young master is hurled through the air. He crashes violently against the ground of the mental battlefield, generating an immense cloud of dust and debris. Klein is left on his knees, leaning on his sword and coughing up blood, feeling the tremendous damage he just suffered from the blow. He recognizes the frightening power of that technique, remembering that the spirit's amount of mana should be no different from a common knight. Rudel warns from afar for him not to underestimate the efficiency of northern swordsmanship, revealing that the technique was so difficult that not even his children learned it. The spirit proudly asserts that even if he is the strongest necromancer on the continent, breaking through that swordsmanship technique is impossible. The young master wipes the blood from his mouth and bitterly admits that he did not expect to have his physical limits exposed so quickly. However, he soon flashes a defying smile and warns that from now on he will also start fighting with all his strength. He arrogantly reveals that the duel is over, as he has already managed to perfectly register the entire technique with his own eyes. Klein scoffs, asserting that in the end, that sword technique wasn't even that difficult to comprehend after all. The spirit gets extremely irritated by his arrogance and shouts that it is not a simple technique that one can copy by seeing it just once. The atmosphere on the mental battlefield grows extremely heavy as the two warriors prepare for the final clash. Rudel charges with all his absurd speed, focused on ending the boy's petulance with a deadly strike of blue energy. Without backing down a single millimeter, Klein advances toward him, wielding his sword enveloped in purple spiritual flames. To Rudel's absolute surprise, the two unleash the exact same secret move of the legendary Phantom Sword at the same time. The countless trajectories of blue and purple blades collide in the air, creating a brilliant spectacle of energy and destructive power. The two exchange dozens of fake and true blows in a fraction of a second, generating a sharp sound of clashing metal. Rudel roars furiously, telling the boy not to get cocky, while focusing all his spiritual strength to try and dominate the deadly confrontation. At once, Rudel finds it unbelievable that a mere necromancer wants to help the family of his own enemy. He questions why someone like the boy would do something like that. While the two continue exchanging sword blows, Rudel shouts with fury that he is nothing but scum, known as the demon of the continent. Klein just listens to everything in silence, his nose bleeding because of the immense physical exertion. The clash between the two ceases, and they stand facing each other on the vast mental battlefield. Rudel lowers his guard a bit and directly asks the reason why he is doing all of that. He highlights that Klein could have very well dodged the last blow if he wanted to. The young master responds by citing the words honor and loyalty, leaving the ancient duke surprised. He explains that because he lived as a necromancer, he found the way knights valued those words pathetic. However, everything changed when he witnessed something that opened his eyes in the past. Klein reveals having seen someone who went through the same pain as him, but who chose to fight for the future of children. He asserts that he does not care about other people's opinions, as he only wants to see that promised future with his own eyes. The young man wants to personally witness that tomorrow he heard so much about Rudel comments in his thoughts that he became a wandering soul due to regrets he does not intend to reveal to anyone. Even so, he begins to reconsider the young necromancer's proposal given his determination. He admits that the answer to his doubts may truly lie in that future mentioned by Klein. With a smirk, Rudel officially announces that he accepts the necromancy contract. Klein remains in silence, staring intently at the spirit of his ancestor. The young man agrees, saying that his duty is precisely to free him from this burden of regrets. Klein tries to propose a mutual contract, but the ancient duke prefers it to be a servant one to avoid a headache. Rudel laughs and jokes that at least the boy shows some self-awareness regarding his actions. The deceased Rudel Rhineland then solemnly declares that he entrusts his desires and regrets to his guide. Next, Klein declares that, as the guide Archimond, he accepts inheriting every single one of those feelings. The pact establishes that the guide will light the spirit's path until all outstanding matters are resolved. With the conclusion of the oath, Rudel's soul promises to transform into Klein's relentless sword. Already transformed, the Death Knight asks in an intimidating manner if the boy is ready for the consequences. Klein smiles slightly and replies that if he can move, that is great, since the departed should not worry about the living. With the Death Knight contract finalized, Klein suggests that they go pay a visit to his aunt. In another room of the mansion, little Erin sleeps deeply while letting out a light snore. She babbles some confused words in her dream about a Death Knight. Suddenly, the girl wakes up startled, shouting for a teriyaki-flavored cookie outside the quarters. Someone calls for the young master. First thing in the morning, Klein is lying comfortably on the couch with a book covering his entire face. Aaron announces that everyone is already ready to depart for Polwyvern and wonders if he ended up passing away right there. He simply removes the book from his face and slowly sits up with a tired look. The young man thinks to himself that he used up every last drop of energy on the contract 3 days ago and still feels exhausted. He mentally calculates that his current physical condition is terrible and that he needs to sleep more before traveling. Aaron glares at him with suspicion and points out that he has been strangely weak for the past 3 days. Nervously, the young man tries to cover it up, saying he just hasn't been able to sleep very well lately. The little redhead fires back instantly, calling him a liar, and asks what could be keeping him awake in the middle of the night. Worried that she might have discovered the truth, he lies, saying he was just doing research late at night. She opens the book and shows that it remains on the exact same page as before. Debunking his excuse, Klein panics, as he notices that the book is open precisely to the page of the Death Knight invocation circle. Aaron demands to know what he has been doing behind her back and behind Lord Dunkel's back during the night. Dunkel slowly turns around in absolute silence to stare at the two in the room. The commander then calls for the young man in a serious manner, leaving Klein extremely startled. Klein begins to despair on the inside, wondering if the commander ended up overhearing their entire conversation. The boy stammers, trying to explain himself, fearing severe consequences if they discover that he revived his own ancestor. He imagines Father Garrison discovering everything and painfully cleansing him with a massive smile on his face. In total panic, Klein shouts that this can never happen, but soon tries to compose himself before Dunkel places one of his heavy hands on Klein's shoulder with a dull thud. The commander tries to reassure the young master, saying that it is all right and that he does not need to feel embarrassed. Klein is left confused, but sighs in relief, thinking that Dunkel simply decided to ignore the matter. However, a doubt soon arises in his mind about the real meaning of not needing to feel embarrassed. Dunkel then crouches down to get on Aaron's level and asks the little maid to listen very carefully. He solemnly explains that the young master is going through an extremely important growth phase. Aaron gets curious about this phase, and Dunkel confirms by saying that similar things will keep happening. She asks if he will keep being weak like this, and the commander replies that this is just a natural phenomenon. Dunkel adds by saying that, at Klein's age, it is totally normal for his body to be full of vigor and energy. Indignant, Klein wonders what on earth that crazy knight is thinking about his privacy. Dunkel gives a thumbs up, implying that this is something every man goes through, causing the boy to shout, denying everything. The young master loses it from embarrassment, swearing he would never get so desperate as to do that by himself in the middle of the night. To make matters worse, Dunkel says he is going to report this important maturation to the Duke, leaving Klein in complete shock. The commander argues that, as the young man's guardian, it is his duty to inform him of such joyful news. He adds that young Deline also already went through this phase, making Klein curse everything in silence with a satisfied smile. Dunkel says goodbye and leaves the room to go speak with Duke Heinkel. Klein angrily thinks that he should have turned that insolent man into a Death Knight instead of his grandfather. Without wasting time, the boy quickly opens the door and shouts to try and stop the commander from spreading gossip. But upon opening the door, he ends up coming face to face with an imposing blonde woman who is already there waiting for him. Klein is surprised to recognize that the mysterious visitor is none other than his cousin Laya. She glares at him in a serious manner and coldly announces that she came to fetch him personally for the trip. The young man remembers that today was the day to visit Helion, but finds it strange that the commander herself came in person. Suddenly, a shiver runs down Klein's spine as he thinks of a terrible possibility. He fearfully asks if she happened to overhear the conversation from earlier, but she replies that she has no interest in his private life. Laya hurries him up, saying that Helion is waiting, and the boy notices how the Duchess uses the princess herself as a messenger. He knows that if he doesn't act now, Helion will become a major threat in the future. So he plans to make his presence felt on this visit. Klein even considers using Rudel if necessary, but his thoughts are cut short when he sees someone entering the carriage. He finds Laya's attitude strange and questions why she is getting into the same carriage as him, also asking about Arin. The blonde explains that she let the little one go on ahead because she wanted to ride a horse, leaving Klein quite surprised. Klein tries to step out to take the other empty carriage, but his cousin immediately denies the request in a firm manner. She says in an authoritative tone that the trip will be made exactly that way, leaving no room for discussions. Klein gulps as he realizes he will have to make the entire long journey locked up alone with his intimidating cousin. The Polwyvern clan, one of the 3 great families of the continent, ended up splitting into 2 factions after the Duke's passing. On one side is the Duchess's faction, led by Helion, the late Duke's second wife who came from the Rhineland family. On the other side is the conservative faction, led by Laya herself, the ancient Duke's eldest daughter and commander of the Knights. Amidst this political tension, the journey proceeds until Laya suddenly orders the young man to take off his clothes. Klein is left completely speechless and asks with a confused face if she is truly being serious about this. The boy wonders in his thoughts if someone cast a hex on him because everyone decided to act bizarrely today. To make everything worse, the young man feels that this uncomfortable situation is frighteningly similar to something from his past. He complains that a knight commander shouldn't act like a bandit, but she impatiently insists for him to strip down. He decides to use the opportunity to uncover her ulterior motives and demands a clear explanation before doing anything. Laya changes her tone and asks if he is aware of the strange occurrences outside the Rhineland territory. She reveals that several people suddenly began losing their minds, displaying a physical strength completely out of the ordinary. This mysterious, bizarre condition allows mere peasants to lift boulders that 3 grown men couldn't move. Klein asks what this has to do with taking off his clothes, and the warrior replies by citing his recent duel trial. She points out that his hands are not those of a swordsman, yet he still managed to easily defeat an experienced knight of the Empire. Laya explains that the trademark of these unhinged individuals is bulging blue veins, and she needs to check his body. The young master is intrigued by the rumor of the blue veins and knows she wouldn't believe him if he said it was all due to his eyes. Realizing that she investigated a lot, the boy decides to cooperate and calmly says that people simply change. He reflects that a throwing tantrums child from the past now knows how to ride a horse, and even old enemies lose their importance over time. He adds that learning is even faster when talent, effort, and the need to survive come together. He concludes by saying that nothing in the world stays the same and that everything changes, including at that exact moment of their conversation. But his cousin cuts right through the philosophical mood by mocking his height, saying he remains much shorter than her. She keeps teasing, commenting that the boy's back and shoulders remain strangely narrow and small. Klein decides to counterattack and reminds her that she had promised to give him a special gift if he won the duel. He recalls her promise to give him a kiss, leaving the proud commander visibly embarrassed and shaken. Taking advantage of the opening to shift the focus from her investigation, the boy insists on the wager while she tries to deny it in every possible way. Klein mocks the lack of emotional control from a knight commander, seeing that his distraction plan worked very well. With all his past life experience, he shouts back, proposing that she take off her own clothes first if she wants to see him undressed. An awkward and heavy silence takes over the interior of the carriage right after that bold provocation. On the outside, little Erin senses that something strange is happening in the air and lets out a murmur of doubt. She looks back and wonders if there is a serious problem going on with their carriage. Back inside the vehicle, Laya grips the seat firmly and tells him to pay close attention. She reinforces that she is the princess of Polwyvern and a commander, having no personal reason to want to touch his body. The young master asks what she will do if she is completely wrong in her suspicions about the marks on his body. She firmly replies that she will offer a sincere apology and take full responsibility for her current lack of manners. Klein smirks upon hearing the word responsibility come out of his proud cousin's mouth. He accepts the challenge in an enigmatic way, saying he can barely wait to see how she will fulfill that promise. The group finally arrives at the majestic Polwyvern territory, standing before a colossal estate that looks like a palace. Erin is completely marveled by the grandiosity of the castle and comments with her mouth wide open about the size of the place. Klein fully agrees with her as he observes the impressive architecture of the fortress. He comments that the gigantic estate appears to be at least 3 times the size of his own family's mansion. The young master smiles internally, thinking that the smell of wealth in that place is almost a bit suffocating. He is impressed to see that the power and prestige of the Polwyvern family truly rivaled that of the imperial palace. Erin asks where the commander went, and he replies that she simply vanished the moment they arrived there. A calm voice addresses him by his title of Lord of Rhineland, causing him to turn around immediately to see who it is. A bald older gentleman with glasses bows respectfully and introduces himself as Gordon, the head butler of the ducal house of Polwyvern Klein, politely thanks him for the invitation, formally introducing himself while pushing Arin's head down to make her greet the butler. Gordon flashes a welcoming smile and invites the young master and his companion to finally step inside the castle. The butler announces that Duchess Hellion is already awaiting them in the luxurious and bustling main hall. Klein walks through the great hall, observing the nobles conversing in an animated and elegant manner around him. Gordon comments that it had been a very long time since a member of the Rhineland Main family last visited their territory. The elderly man reveals that the lack of visits worried the late Duke, but believes that many things will now change with Klein's coming. The boy finds it strange for such an important butler to share such confidential concerns with an outside visitor like him. Klein suspects the old man might consider him a potential political ally and decides to ask a direct question about the past. He questions exactly how the ancient Duke passed away, but is interrupted by a female voice announcing her arrival from above. Firm and elegant clicks of high heels echo down the marble staircases, drawing the attention of everyone present. Hiding part of her face with a dark fan, the mysterious woman comments that Klein's face is identical to that of his late mother. The nobles in the hall begin to whisper in surprise upon seeing that the Duchess herself decided to come down personally to receive them. A castle guard roars loudly, calling for the attention of all the guests present in the main hall of the mansion. He loudly announces the triumphant arrival of the Duchess, ordering everyone to bow immediately to greet her with respect. While Gordon bows respectfully, Klein remains standing, closely observing the arrival of his aunt Helion. The leader of the collateral faction, Lady Helion, welcomes him with a piercing gaze and calls Klein her dear nephew mentally. The young master returns to talking with his new Death Knight to remind him of a detail of the contract. Klein recalls that his main objective there is to work hard to restore the prestige of the House of Rhineland. He reveals that the person he is about to face right now is, in fact, his main enemy and current political rival. Without hesitating for a second, Klein reveals to the ancient Duke that this major rival of his is none other than his very own daughter. Helion is Heinkel's older sister, who married a member of Polwyvern, one of the three great families of the Empire. She used coldness to dominate local politics and ended up allying with the Empire after the Duke's passing, betraying her own bloodline. With an extremely calculating gaze, the relentless leader of the collateral faction calls the young master to approach her. The guests begin to whisper about Klein's presence, remembering that he is the boy who claimed to be Archimond when he was a child. Arin nudges her young master, asking what she should do while he handles this whole reception. He points to a massive tower of sweets in the hall and tells her to go over there and stuff herself with the treats. The little girl runs off super excited toward the cookies, and Klein knows that that dessert table will be devoured in the blink of an eye. Meanwhile, the hustle and bustle in the gigantic Polwyvern fortress continues at full steam with the family reception. A hearty and luxurious meal with fresh bread, soups, and noble meats is served to the special guests at the dining table. Sitting at the extremely long dining table, Klein greets his aunt, saying it has been quite a while since their last meeting. Hellion responds coldly and tells her nephew to sit, while a young man with light hair accompanies her closely from behind. That one right there is the heir of Polwyvern. A young man with an arrogant look named Hector Ross Fallwyvern Klein notes that Hector is Helion's son and notices right away that his cousin does not seem pleased at all with his presence. Suddenly, the Death Knight's voice echoes in Klein's mind, calling him by his old name of Archimond. The spirit of his ancestor makes a serious request, pleading never to be forced to have to fight against his own daughter. Klein thinks Rudel is talking nonsense for not reading the contract properly, but soon his aunt interrupts, asking if something is wrong. Helion feigns sympathy and tells him to make himself completely at home and to let her know if he feels any kind of discomfort during dinner. Klein just sighs mentally in the face of that fake warm welcome he is receiving at the table. The young man feels that the atmosphere in the room is so tense it seems like everyone there is about to draw their swords against him. Helion continues the topic, commenting that seeing how much he has grown brings back many memories, especially because of his eyes. She says he looks a lot like his mother, Claire, and the young master just responds indifferently, wondering if that is true. He explains that unfortunately he has almost no memories of his mother. Since he was told she passed away when he was still very little, Klein lays it straight and says that if she is trying to win him over, it would be much better to start talking about another, more practical matter. The Duchess fires back instantly, saying he understood wrong as she is not trying to flatter him, but rather giving him an opportunity to choose. She directly offers a bold proposal for him to leave the Rhineland family behind and join her faction. Helion reveals that she already knows all about his deeds, including how he defeated an imperial knight and humiliated the proud Count Cornwell. She highlights with admiration that he achieved all of this using solely and exclusively his own strength and intelligence. The Duchess explains that the main Rhineland family is in decline and that the AI era of depending solely on a famous last name is already over. Klein counters by saying that Rhineland ruled the north very well up until now and asks if she is proposing that he become a dog of the empire. Helion says it is normal for him to think that way, but points out that the ducal houses are nothing more than mere drops of water before the immense power of the emperor. She makes a metaphor with the wine being poured, explaining that just because a drop gets lost in the rushing river, that by no means it simply ceased to exist or lost its essential strength. On the contrary, she asserts with conviction that this tiny drop may very well be capable of changing the direction of the tide one day. The boy realizes that the Duchess is just pretending to ally with the Empire while secretly planning to take control of everything in the end. Hector gets extremely irritated by Klein's sassy tone and confident posture in front of his respectable mother. Helion advises her nephew not to waste his talent on a declining family and promises to give him something more precious than life itself. She enigmatically whispers that this promised incomparable prize is nothing more, nothing less than time itself. The Duchess highlights that even the demon who shook the continent and the hero who defeated him ended up succumbing to the inexorable passage of time. She claims to hold the special power to overcome even death and promises to share this secret if he swears total loyalty to her. Klein is left pensive, noting that his aunt's steady and calm look indicates she is not bluffing about this incredible mystery. He reaches his hand toward his glass and admits that not even he himself knows for sure the real reason he is protecting the Rhineland family. The young master simply pushes the wine glass with his finger and says he finds it very annoying when another person breaks his things. He adds with a smirk that he only accepts seeing something ruined if he himself is the one responsible for that. Destruction. With the spilled wine spreading across the table, Klein makes it clear that he has the slightest intention of handing his family over to anyone. Helion takes on a frighteningly dark and furious expression, as she admits she never imagined being rejected in that manner. Mockingly, the boy replies that there are many things she will experience for the first time in life and will need to get used to. Hector can no longer stand to watch Klein's audacity and turns sharply with his hand on the hilt of his weapon. He begins to walk heavily in Klein's direction, making his steps echo threateningly through the luxurious hall. Hector draws his gleaming blade before Klein and utters his cousin's full name with a deep hatred in his gaze. He orders the boy to get on his knees and beg for his mother's forgiveness immediately so that he might overlook that tremendous insolence without showing fear. Klein mocks Hector by calling the heir a mommy's boy, leaving the young man even more infuriated. Hector retorts with arrogance, saying that a classless bastard would never be able to comprehend a devotion as noble as his. He delivers a cruel low blow by pointing out the fact that Klein grew up an orphan and without the love of a real mother. A sharp clink echoes through the hall as the two cousins stare at each other in an extremely hostile manner. Hector is caught off guard when Klein decides to take the initiative and warns that he is going to give him a valuable piece of advice. He blocks his cousin's sword using just a fork and tells him not to interrupt when the adults are talking. A deadly silence falls over the dining hall as everyone observes that unbelievable display of skill. Hector becomes enraged and questions how a boy who looks much younger than him dares to call himself an adult. Klein tells him to shut his mouth once and for all, asserting that he is much older and telling the child to stop talking back. Seeing that the situation is crossing the line, Helion intervenes with coldness and orders Hector to stop immediately. The young man apologizes to his mother for making a scene, but angrily argues that Klein gravely insulted the Duchess of Polwyvern. He roars furiously in his thoughts that he needs to cut off at least one of the insolent boy's hands to wash his mother's honor. Hector advances with impressive speed in Klein's direction, shattering part of the table's tableware. With the impact, several silver forks and knives are hurled through the air toward the attacker like deadly and fast projectiles. Demonstrating quick reflexes, Hector manages to strike back and deflect the thrown cutlery using his sword. Klein leaps nimbly backward into the air, while his adversary attempts to deliver a rapid sequence of sword strikes. In the middle of the evasive leap, the young master draws his own weapon in a clean and agile manner to defend against the imminent attack. The blades of the two cousins collide in the air several times in a row, generating brilliant sparks and a sharp clashing sound of metal. Upon landing, they continue exchanging swift blows while moving through the hall with extreme agility. The two lock their blades very close to each other. Initiating a direct contest of physical strength in the middle of the hall, Klein uses his excellent technique to slide the dagger's blade and attempt to disarm his cousin in a swift movement. With extreme dexterity, he dodges to the side in a perfect spin and positions himself in a blind spot right behind Hector. The young master mentally recognizes that the heir's sword technique is very decent and that his title is not for nothing. However, before his cousin can react, Klein executes a quick movement with his feet to apply a surprise strike. He delivers a swift low sweep from the bottom up, taking his opponent completely off the ground and destabilizing his guard. Next, he slams the heir headfirst directly against the dining table with devastating physical force. He pins Hector down and coldly comments that his aunt is right, because time truly is more valuable than life to him. With a dark and intimidating gaze, Klein says he has just awakened after so long, leaving his cousin terrified beneath him. He questions why on earth he should waste his precious and limited lifespan on a useless and weak pest like him. The young master concludes his frightening threat by saying with a psycho look that it would be much easier and faster to just end him. Hector trembles in absolute dread before that intent to harm, but suddenly a firm voice orders the two of them to stop. That a gigantic knight suddenly emerges from behind and places one of his heavy hands firmly on Klein's shoulder. That one right there is Helion's direct knight, Sanchez, who tells the two to return to their seats since they are in the presence of the Duchess. Given the intervention of such a powerful warrior, the short physical dispute at the table is brought to an abrupt and tense end. Klein goes on alert, realizing that Sanchez managed to approach and touch him without emitting the slightest sign of presence beforehand. Sitting in her chair, Lady Helion continues observing the entire situation in silence, with an analytical and indecipherable look. Hector tries to compose himself and realizes he ended up getting way too carried away in front of his mother, which would only bring serious trouble for him. Klein slowly removes his hand from near Hector's neck, deciding to back off for now to avoid further commotion. Trying to save what remained of his wounded pride, Hector stands up and tells the boy to consider that as his mother's mercy. However, even while pretending to back down, the young man holds a small golden knife behind his back in a treacherous manner. With an insane and treacherous look, Hector quickly spins around, delivering a surprise strike with the knife toward his cousin. The sharp tip of the weapon stops just a few millimeters away from Klein's eye, who doesn't even blink in the face of that cowardly onslaught. Suddenly, Laya's hand emerges out of nowhere, blocking the cheating heir's armed arm with extreme precision and firmness. Hector's eyes widen in shock at being contained so easily, while the large guard Sanchez merely observes Klein look surprised to the side. Intrigued by the sudden protective intervention of his cousin, at such a critical time, Laya stares at him and says she came solely to make him pay for the insolence committed inside the carriage. If you want the next part, like and comment.